across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, it's Monday afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell, in for Jeremy Kyle all week. Thank you so much for your company. There's an awful lot to talk about, including whether you think our boys and girls should go on peacekeeping duties to Ukraine. That's what the Prime Minister Keir Starmer is proposing today. There's a lot of very fast-moving diplomacy around this. The Americans, the Russians, and in Paris there are quite a few European nations talking about this. We'll get to the bottom of this. We'll get the full detail of this and get your voice on the air. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about the UK wasting billions on crazy foreign projects such as Kenyan gender lectures while dithering on defence spending, and what level should the defence spending actually be. Deliveroo, the food delivery company, has sacked more than 100 drivers in a crackdown on illegal immigrants. Often what they do is they sort of nab other people's identities, they have them sold to them, and then illegal immigrants come and make money. And there's fury as 25,000 small boat migrants have reached Britain since Labour came to power. I wonder if some of them have been working for Deliveroo or other companies who are delivering food. We're talking about universities doubling investment in diversity staff over the past 3 years, and we have an interview with Jimmy Mizzen's father. Jimmy Mizzen, you may remember, was the totally innocent victim of that absolute scumbag, the drill rapper, who has been putting clips on TikTok despite being in prison, making money out of the vile form of rap called drill, even though he's rapping about killing people. It is absolutely horrendous and should be stopped. It's also 500 days since the 7th of October. We will be marking the fact that there are over 60 hostages still being held by Hamas terrorists. We'll get your calls, texts and tweets on all of these issues. We're talking about the threat of Russia to Europe. We're talking about British troops undertaking a peacekeeping role in Ukraine. What do you think about all of that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp voice note or send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring for a live discussion. 0344 499 1000. That's the main number. Plenty to discuss between now and 7. Stay with me here on Talk. Well, Jane has been in touch already and said this might be a silly question, but why didn't the European leaders have these talks whilst Biden was president? Jane, it is not a silly question at all, and you would imagine that some sort of preparation would be needed to be had for the end of the war. But it's really Trump now who is talking about how this war ends, about how these negotiations actually happen. And it is, as you sort of threw forward to, I suppose, in your question, it is these European leaders who are really scrambling actually to keep up. They're saying that they're in front of this. I don't think they are. And actually, we're just going to listen now to what the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, what he's been saying about British troops undertaking a peacekeeping role in Ukraine.
We must continue to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, whatever happens next, and to make sure that if there is peace, and we all want peace, that it is lasting. This isn't just about the front line in Ukraine, it's the front line of Europe and of the United Kingdom. It's about our national security, and I think that we need to do more. We need to step up in terms of our collective response in Europe, and by that I mean capability, by that I mean playing our full part when it comes to the defence of the sovereignty of Ukraine if there's a peace agreement, and of course when it comes to funding and training.
Well, Keir Starmer also spoke about the threat of Russia to Europe.
We could have a resolution tomorrow if Russia, the aggressor, pulled back. We don't know what's going to happen next. And we need to have realistic and credible answers to how any ceasefire, how any peace agreement will be lasting, just and enduring, because the last thing I want to see is a pause in the fighting that simply gives Putin the chance to come again. I think it's very important for the UK to be talking, obviously, with our European allies, as we do the whole time, and to the US, got a special relationship. But I do think there's a huge amount of overlay in terms of what we're trying to achieve, which is that lasting peace and dealing with the threat that is there from Russia.
Well, Angela has been in touch on Twitter. She says, I do not agree with our troops being sent to Ukraine. Our troops should be protecting our borders. How about that, says Angela. Let's put all of this and really think about how Europe can step up to this challenge. That's what Keir Starmer wants them to do, with Chris Parry, Dr. Chris Parry, who's a Rear Admiral and former NATO commander. Chris, thank you for joining me this afternoon. Let's just examine those couple of points from Keir Starmer first. He says he wants this to be, if it is to be a peace or some sort of ceasefire or end to the war, he wants it to be lasting and enduring. How realistic, first of all, do you think that is?
Well, Peter, we're early days yet, and I think to say there's going to be peace is a bit premature. We know that Putin says he's not going to give up any of the territory that he's captured. The discussions haven't taken place between President Trump and Vladimir Putin yet. There is no job to do yet. There isn't a peace to keep. And frankly, Peter, the war's going badly for Russia at the moment. They need it possibly more than Ukraine does. So rather putting a ceasefire and a small peace agreement in place right now is just going to give him the chance to refresh, rearm and come back again. This is not sensible to actually talk about what happens after an agreement that may not happen.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point. And I wonder whether Keir Starmer is getting too ahead of himself as well by saying things like, oh, we'll just commit a load of troops to a peacekeeping force, because you have General Lord Dannatt, for example, over the weekend saying, well, actually that would take an awful lot of our troops out of commission. Well, they'd be quite literally deployed. On these tours, for example, even on peacekeeping, and actually there aren't enough. And similarly, you know, is that something that Keir Starmer can simply say, right, we're going to do it? I mean, we know there's basically unanimity. There's a couple of parliamentarians and Reform UK who probably not going to be happy with it. But you know, he would get a majority in Parliament were he if he wanted to do this. But I think it's perhaps a little bit premature, and I wonder what you think, Chris. You're the expert in regard to Keir Starmer simply saying, "Oh, we'll just do this."
Well, I mean, I haven't seen a strategy yet. I haven't seen any operational concept. Nobody seems to be considering that the border between Ukraine and Russia is 1,600 kilometres long. Just give you an idea of the costs. When we deployed forces to the Balkans in the 1990s, it cost $2.5 billion in additional cost to send essentially what was a brigade with supporting troops. Now, you know, not every European country is going to be happy with putting troops into Ukraine. I suspect the Germans won't, the Poles won't, and it'll probably be down to the French and the British, and we simply don't have enough troops. And the fact of life is, everybody thinks these will be peacekeeping troops, some sort of holiday with attitude. It's not. You're in the front line against Russia. And one thing that everybody's forgetting here is these European troops are NATO troops. And one of the things that Vladimir Putin was really angry about, and what has caused part of this war, is the idea of having NATO troops on Ukrainian soil. This hasn't been thought through at all. And I'm afraid this posturing and rhetoric is no substitute for coherent policy. It's way ahead of the game, and we should wait and see the structure and framework of the negotiations before we start throwing troops around. There's another point, Peter. If we've got troops down there in Ukraine, it means that Putin can probe other parts of NATO to see where it's weak, like in the Baltic, around our coasts and things like that. Because be in no doubt, it's not just going to be ground troops we're going to have to commit. It'll be naval and air forces as well to cover the Black Sea and any no-fly zones that are in place. You know, this is, I think it's grossly irresponsible to actually start saying we're going to put troops on the ground ahead of any concept of operations, any strategy, or indeed any peace. There isn't one.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, and I wonder whether this, from my sort of side of the analysis spectrum, politically to me, and I wonder what you think, this just seems to be saying, right, Trump has got some serious momentum here. Who knows whether it's going to work out or not. He's put the cat amongst the pigeons, as he often does with a lot of the things he says and does. He's had this long conversation with Putin. We now need to be seen to act. That is my impression of what Keir Starmer and a number of other European leaders are doing, and they haven't done that for a while. And it actually comes back to Jane's question a little bit earlier on, saying, why didn't they have these discussions before? Why wasn't there a question about, this war is going to end somehow. How does it end? And that question, to me, was never really properly tackled, certainly by Keir Starmer and other leaders, I talk about the Conservatives as well, in the last 3 years.
Yeah, there's also a rhetorical flourish here that somehow the front line in Ukraine is the front line of Europe and the front line of the UK. That's just not true. The fact of life is Ukraine is a very big country that provides a huge buffer zone. It's not urgent in terms of defence. The other thing, Peter, is I would hesitate to put our army anywhere near the sort of combative action that we're seeing in Ukraine right now. They just wouldn't survive. And so you never send a deterrent force that can't actually fight properly in the environment in which they're going to go.
So your position, sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but your position is that they're just not equipped for this. They don't have the hardware, they don't have the training, they don't have the wherewithal to actually deal with the Russian troops.
Well, if it comes to it, yeah. I mean, but again, Peter, what's the role? Is it peacekeeping or peacemaking, or is it to deter Russia from coming across the border? Because, right now, once he's regrouped, Putin would love to be able to take on some NATO troops and possibly give them a beating, because that's great for his ratings in Russia. And of course, it really ramps things up if the Americans have to come and rescue the Europeans yet again, like they did in Libya and of course in the Balkans. This is something that would split NATO almost certainly. And above all this, we mustn't forget that NATO still exists. And it's no good saying that French and English troops are Europeans one day and NATO the next. They are NATO troops. They will be within 500 miles of Moscow and what used to be Stalingrad, Volgograd. That's not going to make the Russians very happy at all.
Andy has asked on text, can Chris please tell us what's going wrong for Russia and why is it going wrong? Chris.
Yeah, okay. So they're fighting on a very broad front, basically from the west near the Dnieper, right the way through to the eastern provinces of Donbass and Luhansk. The offensive that they started in November has really slowed. They're trying to capture a city called Pokrovsk in the east, and they're losing thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of troops there. They still haven't thrown the Ukrainians out of the Kursk salient in the north. But more importantly, their economy is grinding down very, very happily. And the easiest way to end the war is to depress the cost of oil. If you bring the cost of oil down by $15 a barrel, Vladimir Putin ain't going to be able to continue this war for much longer. There are other ways to do this. So if I'm President Trump, what I've got to do is say, look, you can't afford, Vladimir, to actually sort of carry on this war any much longer. So I'm offering you a way out here, an off-ramp. The key issue is, how much of the territory Ukraine can get back in the negotiations, because I think Putin is adopting a maximalist policy. He wants to keep the lot, Crimea and the other 4 oblasts that he's holding on to at the moment. And I have to say, if you're not prepared to help Ukraine assault those oblasts, there's not much chance of Ukraine getting them back.
Chris, that's the best analysis I've heard in the last week on all of this. Thank you so much. Chris Parry there, Dr. Chris Parry, former Rear Admiral, former NATO commander. Really interesting stuff there. Thank you to Jan in Worksop. He says, my son pledged allegiance to the Queen, did 3 tours of Afghanistan, nearly blown up 3 times, lost comrades. Why should he fight for a phony war? Politicians send their kids first, or the migrants. Starmer not getting my son when he's not helping UK citizens. Jan, thanks for that. Mick in Wellington says, Starmer's yearning for attention will start World War III and cause the deaths of thousands of our poorly equipped troops. Jane says, no UK troops should be going to Ukraine on behalf of the Prime Minister, especially when he cannot protect his own borders and seems to put his own citizens last. Sean says, over the Ukraine war, all the irrelevant leaders of Europe scrambling to look important on the world stage as Trump and Putin may talk without them, a bunch of wannabe statespeople trying to save face in the world. Peter, so Starmer thinks he will be a bridge between Trump and Europe. As he finalises his worth, bridges get walked all over. Barry says, so our troops may be off to Ukraine to front up to the Russians, sent by a Prime Minister who can't front up to the farmers. Let's talk to Paul in Newport. First call of Drive today, 0344 499 1000. Paul, what do you make of all this? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hello, Peter. Good to speak to you.
You too.
I was just thinking, in the modern world, a war isn't just on, it's just not a strip of land and, you get one for everyone. I have no doubt if we upset Vladimir Putin, we best make sure, well, the government best make sure that we've looked at everything else that's going to happen. For example, it won't be just boots on the land.
Yeah.
There will be cyber war like we've never seen, right? And we know that the Russians have got some of the best cyber crims on the planet.
And it's really interesting you mentioned that, Paul, because we've actually heard from some of the army today and some of the leaders of the army in the last few days. They met Starmer on Friday and they have said, give us a national arsenal of high-tech weapons to beat Putin. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the programme, Paul, but you're right. It's not just the physical war, it's actually a war online and in cyber side of things as well, isn't it?
Well, and one of the first things, I'm not second-guessing Putin, I'm not second-guessing the war, I'm not bright enough for that. But the first thing, we know the NHS, for example, the cyber security for the NHS is pants. We know that because it keeps getting hit all the time.
Yes.
So we're all squeaking like stuck pigs about the NHS now. When it completely collapses because Putin says to his cyber crims, bring that down.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be just how many people can you give a gun and a bayonet to. Yeah. It's far beyond
that. You can, as you correctly say, Paul, you can harm people in a very different way and in a much more effective way through, in some cases, through those cyber terrorism acts. So, Paul, really good points there. That's Paul in Newport. Thank you for that. Thanks also to Pete in London, who says that he doesn't believe that Chris Parry is talking sense. People like him have said Russia are losing and out of weapons and out of missiles for 2 years now. Russia are achieving the goals of the SMO. What is the SMO? Do we know what the SMO stands for? I'm sorry, I don't know. Claire says, afternoon, Peter, I would like to know how our British troops feel about being sent to Ukraine. Starmer is a Europhile and Europe is in the forefront of all his thoughts and dealings. I feel that this stance is giving us NATO loving and ego polishing a shine. Hi Peter, we have 100,000 young men of fighting age just sitting around scratching their heads when I send them directly to the front line to fight the Russians. Mick says Starmer seems to have forgotten North Korean and other totalitarian troops are supporting Russia on the front line. And final one before the break, Ed in Cornwall says, I would support our forces being deployed in Ukraine if that was part of a multinational peacekeeping force. A ceasefire would have to be negotiated first, however, and Ukraine must agree. There would have to be a non-NATO troops there as well to ensure it is truly international, says Ed in Cornwall. Really interesting thoughts. Keep them coming in. 0344 499 1000. We will certainly take some more calls as the show goes on. We're going to go down to a big conference in London. Lots of people there, I think a lot of our viewers and listeners will agree with. It's called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. We're going to talk to James Price, the former government advisor, about all sorts of things, including why on earth there are 25,000 small boat migrants reaching Britain since Labour came to power. Stay with us.
need to do is get rid of the bureaucratic nightmare that's the NHS. It really is a bureaucracy. If you review a patient's notes now, and I've been in the business 50 years as a doctor, so I can remember the past. Someone was in charge. The doctors were in charge of the patients, and they'd make sure they got a good journey through the bureaucracy of the system. Okay, when I was first a consultant, the costs were much lower than they are now of treating people, and most people were a lot younger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Loads of people getting in touch on Twitter, including Natalia in Israel, who has very kindly told me that SMO stands for Special Military Operation. Thank you, Natalia. Steve says, my son will go to Ukraine the day after Starmer's son goes. Lenny says, I believe another policy from Starmer doesn't make sense. It will be tying a millstone round our neck, and we cannot afford, we're not financially capable. Angie says, no to our armed forces going to Ukraine. We need to make sure our country is being protected first. They appear to have forgotten that. Bob says, Starmer, the great pretender, he could have said all this 2 years ago. Trump is the catalyst. Let's protect our borders now. And a thought echoed by Amy, who says much the same thing. David says, Chris Barry and other commentators keep telling us the Russian economy is grinding to a halt. This is just not true. I have a lot of contacts from my time working there. It is difficult for individuals, but no worse than normal in reality. I know a business growing 10,000 acres of potatoes, milking 18,000 acres of cows for local markets and exports in the Kaliningrad region, funding from banks and the government, not really a sign of a struggling economy. 2 voice notes on this. First from Gavin.
R.E. Keir Starmer and his response to Ukraine. I don't know about you, but I just want the guy gone. I want him. He's not a leader of this country. He's an embarrassment. And as far as world leaders go, he's useless. I don't listen to anything he has to say at all.
Thanks, Gavin. Chloe has some thoughts on this too.
Hi, Peter. On Ukraine, presumably, if and when a peace deal is struck, these would be NATO or UN troops that would be sent. So I don't suppose the UK will have much choice over whether we send our lads and lasses.
That's actually a very good point, Chloe, and whether Starmer's sort of jumping in before then, although, Ukraine is not a NATO member, it's not a NATO state. That's kind of the point of a lot of this. And it's a very interesting thing. It's been discussed certainly at a big conference in London at the ECHR Centre, which I think is perhaps the biggest conference centre in this country, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship Conference. And the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, spoke earlier there. Let's see what she had to say about immigration.
The current system is being exploited. The public are enraged at the perception that the UK has become a haven for foreign criminals. One case involved a man who was allowed to stay. It was claimed that his son disliked foreign chicken nuggets. In another, a drug dealer reportedly avoids deportation because of his daughter's gender identity issues. But we were members of this convention for half a century without this madness. What's changed? It's not the values, it's the people. They are afraid of creating any kind of conflict. They use the most novel and expansive interpretations of human rights law to avoid it. And we see that lack of confidence now in everything from law and order to national defence. A fear of sticking up for young girls being abused by rape gangs over so many decades so as not to upset community relations.
Kemi Badenoch speaking there, the leader of the opposition. Well, James Price is a former Conservative advisor and he's down there at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference. James, I expect you heard what Kemi Badenoch had to say. What did you make of it?
Yeah, good afternoon, Peter. Thanks for having me on. Well, she's absolutely right in what she said. I suppose the next step is going to be, well, OK, so what? What are we going to do about it? What are the Conservatives going to do about it? What are Labour Party going to do about it? What's the government doing about it? The answer to that, of course, is nothing. And it's interesting, of course, that this is a problem that's happening not just here in the UK, but it's happening across Europe. It's happening in Canada. It's been happening in lots of places. And until very, very recently, it's also been happening in the United States. Now, we're going to get a taste of what it looks like to secure some very open, loose borders. And America, of course, is not inside the ECHR, doesn't have to worry about any of this stuff. And yet, most people would assume that America, that Canada, that New Zealand, that Australia were reasonably civilized places without this ECHR. And I think that Kemi is right to highlight the fact that this was a system that worked pretty well for a while. The ECHR, largely drafted actually by British lawyers after the Second World War, as a way to stop the Europeans, the continentals, from kind of backsliding back into bad ways after the war. And it's now, of course, been taken over by mad activists and all the rest of it. I would like to have heard Kemi say just one more sentence of saying it's so bad we're either going to leave it or we're going to ignore it when it comes to all these mad decisions. That would be the next step, I think, that really would have got the crowd here going wild.
Well, Labour would say, of course, that they are dealing with immigration, that they're going to smash the gangs. They've got an immigration bill that they brought to Parliament in the last couple of weeks. They would also say that a lot of the mess was left by your party, the Conservative Party, and that's why they've had to clean it up. And that's why the legacy of 25,000 small boat migrants have reached this country in the last 7 months, because the Conservatives failed to deal with this issue.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's quite a compelling argument that Kemi Badenoch is going to have to defend against. So every time she goes to criticise anything bad that's happened, 14 years, what did we do? And for my part, I did what I could in the departments I was in. Unfortunately, I wasn't in the Home Office. I'd have loved to have gone to try and take on some of those challenges. But I think that the fundamental thing, if people only take one thing home from this, is that when Starmer and his lot came in July, only 200 people changed jobs. To 100 ministers, 100 advisors, people like you and I, Peter, changed jobs. That's it. Everybody else, all the civil servants, all the officials, all the quangos, all the regulators, all of that stuff, they all stayed exactly the same. And they went from saying, oh, the Rwanda scheme good to the Rwanda scheme bad, and they just changed like that. And these are people who don't have any skin in the game when it comes to any of these policies. Not like, again, in the United States, where thousands upon thousands of dedicated people move in and really believe in the kind of policies that they're pushing.
And you've certainly been hearing about that.
To a system more like that.
You've certainly been hearing a lot about that today at the conference, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference. Just give us a flavour of what's been happening at the Excel Centre in London today.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So the people from all across loads of different countries, we might call the Anglosphere of America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, UK, like I've said, from across the continent of Europe as well. And it's exciting to see people who all get to see the same kinds of problems. As I say, lots of these countries, the main problem is mass migration. It's kind of sclerotic economic growth, although America's managed to have good growth and still has other kind of problems. And it's exciting as well to hear people talk about kind of cultural issues. I think Kemi Badenoch, one of the best lines that she said, and I was overwhelmed by everything she said, but one of the best lines she said was that not all cultures are equal. That's just obviously true to anyone that's travelled around the world. Some cultures are really great, some less so. Some have more rights for, let's say, women. Some have more rights for, let's say, gay people. Some have better ways of dealing with things, less state intervention that makes you have more economic growth, more, you name it, things that will keep your traditions alive versus ones that kind of just let them die. If you've got someone in charge of Canada, for example, who say Canada is the first post-nation state, that Canada's not really anything at all, and then is surprised when Canada starts to fall apart. That was Justin Trudeau. So to hear people talking about this kind of need for a restoration across the whole world is really exciting, it's really encouraging, especially on what might be the thorniest topics of those cultural issues that have been completely taboo from talking about for too long. It's quite exciting.
James, thank you. That's James Price there, former Conservative advisor to the government. Thank you to him. Let's talk to Philip in East Yorkshire, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Philip, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon, Peter.
Hi there.
Show. Yeah, I'm old enough to know. I remember Margaret Thatcher had her Falklands moment, and Tony Blair had his Iraq moment.
Yes.
I just wondered if putting troops into Ukraine, Starmer's way of either getting popularity back in the UK or make him look big on the world stage.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, actually, and I wonder within that, Philip, what you think about the fact that he's maybe trying to get ahead of this a little bit and say, right, we're going to do this, because he actually doesn't have a huge amount of power. It's between Putin and Trump, really, to work out what happens next, isn't it?
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I've followed it quite closely. I mean, I don't think there's really an option. I don't think they're going to go back to the borders as was in 2022 or whenever it was, or getting back the to 2014.
Yeah.
Region.
Well, we will see what happens, Philip, and thanks for your thoughts on that. That's Philip in East Yorkshire there. Thank you to him for that. One person says on text, Russia has been steadily advancing, taking land and settlements with the excursion by Ukraine into Kursk. It's cost them 60,000 men and hundreds of pieces of equipment. We made all these promises that the sanctions would destroy Russia and its army would be defeated with NATO. Another person says, when Starmer goes to see Trump next week, this is the news that Starmer's going to America next week to see Trump, will he be taking the Labour activists with him that wanted Harris to win? Perhaps he can introduce them to the president, says that person, I think, perhaps with her tongue in their cheek. And Jane says, unfortunately for Kemi Badenoch, no one is listening to her. She has been very poor during Prime Minister's questions. Doubt she will see the summer out. The Tories need a plan for the election after the next one, says Jane. What do you think of that? And does Kemi Badenoch actually want the job? There's a very good website called Conservative Home, which really is the sort of Bible of Conservative Party membership. And it asked the question this morning. It said, does she actually really want this job? And I wonder what you think about that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. In a second, we're going to talk about universities doubling investment in diversity staff over the last 3 years. I'd love to be surprised by that, but like you, I expect you're not. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
We're asking the question about whether you are happy for our boys and girls to go to Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping force. That is what Keir Starmer has proposed. Carol in Liverpool says, no, I am not. Francesca says, why doesn't the Prime Minister just let negotiations begin and the dust settle before making such drastic announcements? Soph says, Peter, 25,000 migrants washed up on our shores since the 4th of July. We should count ourselves lucky. I'd hate to see how many would be here if it wasn't for Keir Starmer smashing the gangs. Oh wait, silly me. That's just rhetoric rather than a plan. Interesting one from Ed Davey as well, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. I wonder what you make of this. Within the last hour, he has tweeted, in principle, there should be a vote in Parliament when troops are deployed. That's correct. I mean, the Prime Minister shouldn't really be going around saying, yes, we're going to deploy a load of troops. There should be a vote in Parliament. I agree with Ed Davey on that. Not sure about the next bit, though. In principle, there should be a vote in Parliament when troops are deployed. I'm confident all sides of the House are likely to agree with the Prime Minister, apart from those Trump bootlickers in reform. That's what the leader of the Liberal Democrats says. Trump bootlickers in Reform UK. That's what he is calling them. And When I make a mistake, I am more than happy to correct myself because accuracy is the key. Angie has been in touch and told me that the Birmingham National Exhibition Centre is bigger than the Excel. It is 190,000 square metres. The Excel Centre is a mere 100,000 square metres. I am very happy to correct that, and Angie, thank you for that. Accuracy is key. When you make a mistake, front up and say so. That's what I say. Thank you also to Rachel in Wakefield, who says, I feel that sending British so-called peacekeeping troops into Ukraine will be Starmer's Iraq war and therefore his downfall. The main difference, though, is that Putin does have weapons of mass destruction in the form of cyber terrorism, chemical weapons and nuclear weapons. Will he be sending his own son over there? I think not. Great show as always, says Rachel, and thank you for that. Well, Joanna Marchong is a spokesperson for the Taxpayers Alliance, and we're asking the question about universities who are doubling investment in diversity staff. That's happened over the past 3 years. But just before we get into that with Joanna, maybe we can talk about some of the money that's going overseas, not just to Ukraine, but specifically on a lot of these projects that have come to light, including Kenyan gender lectures as well. We've also heard lots of different bits of information. We know this £15 billion a year overseas aid has been paid, squandered, many would argue, on shrimp farms in Bangladesh, poetry workshops in Colombian jails. I would imagine there are quite a few pensioners saying, well, I mean, I'm all for poetry workshops in Colombian jails, but I quite like my winter fuel allowance. What do you think, Joanna?
Yes, I think you're somewhat completely correct on the fact that foreign aid is being used for kind of silly projects, and we all see the kind of headline grants that have been given out. However, I will say that foreign aid, there's a level that has been committed, and we say that we will give it abroad, and that is completely fine. However, we need to just make sure that every single project that we invest in is actually worthwhile and will be fruitful in the end.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because some of them, many people would argue, actually aren't that fruitful and aren't helping us here at home either. I just wonder, within the thoughts of foreign aid, and certainly the $3 billion that we're sending to Ukraine, perhaps peacekeeping troops as well, I mean, that could be a huge amount of public money that is being spent, and many taxpayers will say, am I getting value for money here? Is this something that I actually, as a taxpayer, support?
Yeah, you will always have those questions. I think right now, considering that Britain is in a situation in what it is, especially when we have people at home kind of worrying about tax rises and problems with not being able to get a job, etc. We've just entered a personal recession. All those things mean that a lot of people will be more upset when hearing about any kind of money going to people that aren't British or abroad in any way.
Let's talk about this university story. This is Oxford University has spent £2.5 million developing EDI, this is Equity, Diversity and Inclusion teams, which critics say are useless amid a higher education funding crisis. And the overall cost has doubled in 3 years, now costing the sector £28 million a year, according to new research. An awful lot of people. Oxford University has 59, now it's a big university, but it's not the biggest, but it has 59 people at a cost of £2.5 million, and the Taxpayers Alliance has found that it's gone up to an average of £168,000 per institution. Tell us about this research, Joanna.
Yeah, so essentially, if you look at over the last 3 financial years, you'll see that EDI spending has drastically increased, and also it's come to a total over the last 3 years of about £45 million. And this story, along with many others that the TPA have done, highlight a bigger problem within the public sector. One, you have councils spending about £52 million. You have NHS spending about 13 million and police forces spending about 11 million. So when you think about the whole picture of it, you see a spending of almost 120 million pounds going towards these roles, which have been proven to be ineffective and counterproductive.
And something that a lot of people are very annoyed about as well, because it is a stark increase here. Why do you think this increase is happening, Joanna?
Well, it's gone along with the trend of virtue signalling. We feel like we have to have something on paper to say, oh, well, we are trying to be inclusive, rather than actually doing the work to be that way. Also, it's one of those things that it's just a box-ticking episode where you can say you're trying to do something again, but not really doing anything. And somehow it's just seemed to have stuck with governments. The previous one tried to get rid of them, although it didn't really they didn't really follow through on it. I thought their initiative was to stop the hiring of them and turn them into general HR managers would be fruitful. But however, it's just not really worked out that way, and somehow it has really stuck, and we have to make sure that people know they are costly and ineffective over and over again.
Joanna, thanks for your thoughts there. Joanna Marchung there from the Taxpayers Alliance, where she's a spokeswoman. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including Joanna, another Joanna, this time from Salisbury, who says the Wagner Group has destabilised most of the African countries, driving them towards the EU. And we even see more being pushed across the Belarusian-Polish border to destabilise us. Russian submarines have regularly been seen eyeing up pipelines and cables around the UK. We underestimate Putin at our peril. Those who would replace him in Russia are even worse. China watches with interest. Ali says, I'm ex-army and would only want our troops going if Ukraine are front and centre of all peace talks, not the US, and also if every other country sends troops as peacekeepers. Jane says, unfortunately, for Starmer, whatever he does, he won't be popular. Perhaps resigning would be the best thing for him to do for the UK. Stuart says, nice to see you on the slot on a Monday, thank you. Whether Kemi really wants the job or not is actually irrelevant, as the simple truth is that she isn't up to the job. That said, whoever takes the job leading the Lib Cons is like taking over for Captain Smith after the Titanic had struck the iceberg. Lots more to discuss on that and indeed Ukraine. In fact, we're going to take a load of your calls right up to 5 o'clock. Make sure you use the break to give us a ring if you want to get your voice on the air. 0344 499 1000.
I think the reason that Gen Z individuals feel perhaps not as tied to Britain is because they don't feel a sense of ownership over the country. If you look at a country where previously your parents on the same salary were able to buy a 3-bed semi, and on the same salary now you can't afford to rent a room, you can understand why young people feel perhaps a little bit disenfranchised. Obviously, I would like young people to be patriotic, but when we look around at the economy they've been handed, the society they've been handed, it's no wonder why they don't necessarily feel that Britain works for them anymore.
Well, yes, but of course they already are. I mean, they poisoned some people in Salisbury a few years ago. They routinely interfere with disinformation to subvert our public discourse. There are plenty of allegations around cyber attacks and whatever else. So, Russia already regards the UK as a thought leader in Europe and sort of a leading rallier, if you like, of European.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Mark is in Suffolk and says, deploying our troops, it's Starmer's desperately trying to stay relevant on the world stage. Nick says, how about looking after this country and its people first? I'm sick of billions being spent in foreign aid and sick of getting involved in everybody's wars. Name one country would lift a finger to help us. Exactly, not one. Well, Nick, in theory, part of the NATO charter is that if we get invaded, well, a lot of other countries would have to come to our aid. That's only actually been triggered once. It was after 9/11 when America did it, but, a lot of NATO countries would have come to their aid anyway. Let's hear from Rob. He's been in touch with a voice note on Starmer and Ukraine.
Do you not reckon, right, Starmer's done this now because he'll have something to talk to Trump about when he gets to America next week? Because didn't Trump say he rang me and asked for a meeting? I don't know what he wants. So obviously now he's got something to talk about, eh?
It's a fair point, Rob, and I think a lot of people would agree with you. I also think that Starmer is really trying to insert himself in the process here. Black Dog has been in touch on Twitter and says, I hope they are led by our so-called king's son and politicians' sons and daughters. I really think this has been planned for a while, hence some of them mentioning conscription last year. So many adverts on TV for people to enlist. The country has gone to pot, Peter. Says that person, and I want to get a thought from Linda, who's been in touch from Kent. And Linda, I understand your son is in the army. Is that correct?
No, he's not in the army. He went to register to go into the army. My family are a family of army veterans. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to continue that tradition. Yeah. But he's 18 years of age, and he actually sat down and came to the conclusion, what is he actually fighting for? Mm-hmm. Because, I know some people say about Gen Z and everything else, but my boy's pretty much got his head, very firmly on. Not
all of Gen Z are necessarily bad people necessarily. I'm not. We've never ever said. I'm sure he's a sensible lad, and he's thought this one out, Linda, by the sound of things.
And but he just sits there and he says, all these boats are coming over. We've got all these men which are, of army age, are fit and healthy. So why can't they be, put up to fight for our country? If you're living here and you want to be here, then you participate in, helping to protect our country. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I do know what you mean, Linda. And I think that it's interesting that your son, especially coming from a family like yours that has sacrificed so much for our country over many generations, is actually thinking, hold on a second, is Britain a country worth fighting for anymore?
Yeah, I mean, the sad thing about it is, Peter, is, the fact of, my dad, I'm an army brat, so I've been here, there and everywhere. And, he just wanted to, have that experience in life. Mm-hmm, and it is truly, truly sad that my son has now come to this conclusion that, his granddad, his nan, his great-grandparents, everything, and everything's gone to pot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that, and I get that frustration, and I can understand that that's something that not just you, Linda, are having, but, the next generation as well in regard to your son. Really interesting call. Thank you for it. Gareth has been in touch and says, I'm saddened by what this country has become and how defenceless it is. As a veteran, I now worry where we will be in a year's time. I'm actively encouraging my daughter, who is a midwife, to go to Australia, says Gareth. Thank you too to Peter, who says, apart from Maloney, it's like a gathering of losers in Paris. Each leader at their lowest popularity, maybe they should listen to their people. Someone needs to tell them that the train has already left. Let's hear from David, who, David, I think you have some thoughts on the Foreign Secretary.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about this. I mean, this is, really dangerous times at the moment, and we've got a Foreign Secretary with really no experience at all at this level, absolutely none. We're looking to build. We're going to be the country that's the bridge to talk to Donald Trump. I'm afraid David Lammy is not that man to do it.
Well, do they even need a bridge? I mean, Starmer needed in this? Is Lammy needed? Because what Trump showed was that he went against what American diplomacy has been for the last 3 years. He picked up the phone, he got his people to dial a number and spoke to Vladimir Putin and said, hi there, let's sort this out.
I can agree with a lot of Donald Trump's methods and things he wants to do, but not this one.
Yeah, and you've no faith by the sound of things in David Lammy?
I'm afraid this one has got to have Europe involved. It's got to have Ukraine involved, which seems like he is going to do that now. Mm-hmm. But if we've got to build alliances with America and Donald Trump, David Lammy's not the one to do it. And our Prime Minister should see that. He should know that he's got the authority or the respect of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, especially given some of the things David Lammy has said about Donald Trump. David, just before you go, have you seen David Lammy in Celebrity Mastermind?
No, I haven't.
Okay, I want you to make me a promise, David. I want to make me a promise that over the next day or two, you'll go on YouTube and look at David Lammy on Celebrity Mastermind. It's 7 minutes of your life. It's really quite incredible.
Right, can I say one more thing?
You can, of course, as long as you promise to look that up on YouTube.
I will do.
Excellent. What else would you like to say?
Look, I'll say this, and I'll David Lammy, maybe he can come back again, but at the moment we need someone of real authority and respect, someone like a Ben Wallace, put him in the House of Lords, get him over there, a man who really knows what he's talking about in this position.
Okay.
I know conservative, and I'd also say I'll put up with Rachel Reeves not having any qualifications. I'll put up with Angela Rayner not having any qualifications to do their jobs. But this job, Foreign Secretary, at this moment, is too serious a job to give to someone who's a rabbit in the headlights.
This is no time for an amateur, as someone once said. David, thank you very much indeed. Enjoy watching Celebrity Mastermind. Ed Davey, this is an interesting one because he has tweeted in the last hour, in principle, there should be a vote in Parliament when troops are deployed. I'm confident all sides of the House are likely to agree with the Prime Minister, apart from those Trump bootlickers in reform. That is what Ed Davey has said. Barry has reacted to this and said Ed Davey is symptomatic of the lack of manners and class now missing from the House of Commons. By insulting the MPs of Reform UK, he is also insulting their supporters and only pouring more fuel on the fire. Chris in Ottershaw. Chris, I haven't heard from you in a while. Hope all's well in Ottershaw. Hope you're well. Ed Davey calls Reform for being Trump bootlickers. He hasn't learned much of recent history, has he? Labour politicians that have bent over backwards to get into Trump's good books after insulting him in recent years, he may find himself in the same position in the future. Besides, the Lib Dems have proven to be masters of bootlicking anyone who gets into power in the country, i.e. Labour, or more recently, the Tories. Well, let us know what you think of that one as well. Are Reform UK Trump bootlickers, as they've been referred to by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey? Let me know your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. Lee in Bristol says, I doubt anyone will be willing to defend this country until 2029 when Reform UK are running the place. There is nothing to be proud of in Britain at the moment. And Mick in Leeds says, I think we should keep all our armed forces at home on British soil. I think we're heading to situations where we may need them, says Mick in Leeds. One more call before the 5 o'clock news. Gemma is in Staffordshire. Gemma, great to hear from you. What would you like to say?
Oh, Peter, I don't know where to start. but I'm just going to try my best, and you have to guide me because you're the political expert here.
All right, well, go for it, Gemma. Whatever you want to talk about.
Right, this is a mess, okay, and this is actually a very, very serious. One thing I would say, I do not think we should be taking the mickey out of our government right at the moment, okay, because, and I know it's funny, and there, you know, you can spitting image it, all you like, right, but Keir Starmer this, you know, Starmer Harmer, Lama Farmer, whatever, but this is really serious, and David Lammy hasn't got an experience. Fair point, your last caller. Who has then? Ben Wallace? Is he Labour?
Ben Wallace was the Conservative Defence Secretary.
So
he was in the military as well.
Yeah, but he can't be the Defence Secretary because he's Labour.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is a joke. We can't take the mickey out of our government, even if we don't like them, because it makes us look weak to Trump, to Putin, to everybody. Trump, okay, so he's making all of these promises and phone calls, and it's all la-di-da and brilliant. It's posturing, okay? Fair play, he's a good orator, but he's not backing up with plans. You know, he's got a plan.
He would say he's got a plan. He would say we're going to send these peacekeeping troops. All will be well. Ukraine, we're going to be at the forefront of this.
I know what he would say, but you know, he's one man, and this is a global issue, right? And you've got Zelensky, you've got Putin, you've got Starmer. He's a different character from all the others. Imagine this is a school. These are all different head teachers of different schools. This is a recipe for disaster. And also, my last point, if you want me to go, so I know there's loads.
I don't want you to go necessarily,
okay.
Jamie. But if it's your last point, your last point.
My last point is it costs a lot of money to keep the peace. If you're a teacher and you're on the playground, imagine the world's a stage, okay? And well, the world's a school, and you've got all of these kids from all these countries who all want to get top dog, right?
Yep.
Okay, out there on the playground, Trump and all that, they're all there, and everyone's there, and you want to keep the peace. It's much harder to keep the peace than it is to let them all fight with each other and give them all weapons. It's much more expensive, it's much more time-consuming, and in some respects, it's more dangerous to try and keep the peace. So whoever's going to be foreign, defence person, if it's not David Lammy and this mastermind thing, I'd like to see Trump on mastermind, okay? I'd like to see the 5 reform MPs on mastermind. Which one of them has got the defence experience?
Okay, well,
you know what I mean?
They actually don't even have a defence. Well, it's a fair point, Gemma. And actually, Reform UK don't actually have a defence spokesman at the moment. Okay, there's only 5 of them, but they don't have a nominated person who speaks on defence, and that's something that I think I put that to Richard Tice, possibly Rupert Lowe, on another occasion. Let me know your thoughts on everything that Gemma's been talking about. She made some very interesting points there. 0344 499 1000. There's lots more to talk about in regard to Europe and Ukraine. We're going to talk to Simon Diggins, Colonel Simon Diggins, in just a minute. Also, one of the very nice producers left some biscuits, so I'm off for a Tim Tam. I'll chat in a second.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell in for Jeremy Kyle all this week. Thank you so much for your company, whether you're sitting at home or whether you're one of the car dwellers on your way home from work, though a lot of people are off this half-term week. In England anyway, it's not half-term elsewhere in the UK. We're going to talk in just a second to Colonel Simon Diggins about whether Europe can step up on Ukraine. That's what Starmer says. Is he trying to just insert himself in the process, or does he really have a big role here? There's sort of a slightly panicked gathering in France. We'll hear a little bit more about that from Simon, and we'll also talk about the fact that the army has been talking to Starmer this week and saying they need a national arsenal of high-tech weapons to beat Putin. That's what they're talking about, because it's not just the ground war, it's also the air war, and indeed it is the cyber war. So there are lots of different aspects to this. In a few minutes' time, we're also going to talk to Barry Mizzen. He is a heroic figure. He's the father of Jimmy Mizzen. Jimmy was killed, murdered by an absolute scumbag. He's now thankfully back in prison, but he was out of prison, and guess who gave him an opportunity to put his absolutely vile drill rap out there at licence fee payers' expense? Yes, of course, the BBC. BBC One Extra, and his killer has now posted new TikTok rap clips despite the prison recall. Social media firms urged to ban him. We'll talk to Barry in a minute or two about that, and hear about firms planning job cuts as unemployment costs are rising, or on the cost of employment, actually taking people on and keeping people on. I heard yesterday, actually, my weekend shows about that as well. I'm on between 10 and 1 on Saturdays and Sundays, as you may know. As always, between now and 7, I want to make sure I get as many of our viewers and listeners on the air as possible. Whatever your opinion, whether you think I'm talking absolute nonsense or whether you agree with me, that's fine, because on my shows we disagree without being disagreeable. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, send me a voice note. We've had some of those already, we'll have more. 0344 499 1000. That is also the number to send me a WhatsApp text message, and you can give me a ring, of course, for a live conversation on the air between now and 7. The main number, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. There's also quite a few people who are not happy with Ed Davey. He is the leader of the Liberal Democrats, and he has tweeted this afternoon, in principle, there should be a vote in Parliament when troops are deployed. That's fair enough, and I think a lot of people feel that's fine, but it's the second part of his message that a number of our viewers and listeners are not happy with. He continues, Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, I'm confident all sides of the House are likely to agree with the Prime Minister, apart from those Trump bootlickers in reform. What do you make of what he has said? Well, Gary's been in touch in Barnsley in South Yorkshire, and he says it's a shame Ed Davey cannot be less like a clown and more like a leader. Trump and Farage are leaders. I will leave it there. Ed Davey should keep quiet, says Nick, and stick to what he's best at: paddleboarding, bungee jumping and playing on a space hopper. The man is a clown. Another person says, like anyone who's actually going to listen to Ed Davey, still waiting to be held accountable for the post office scandal. Well, what do you think of what Ed Davey has said? Are Reform UK simply Trump bootlickers? That is what the leader of the Liberal Democrats, with his 72 MPs, has said. 0344 499 1000. But now I just want to remind ourselves of what the Prime Minister has been saying. This is on his way to Paris. It is about plans for a peacekeeping force in Ukraine.
We must continue to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, whatever happens next, and to make sure that if there is peace, and we all want peace, that it is lasting. This isn't just about the front line in Ukraine, it's the front line of Europe and of the United Kingdom. It's about our national security, and I think that we need to do more. We need to step up in terms of our collective response in Europe. And by that I mean capability, by that I mean playing our full part when it comes to the defence of the sovereignty of Ukraine if there's a peace agreement, and of course when it comes to funding and training.
The Prime Minister also spoke about the threat Russia poses to Europe in his opinion.
We could have a resolution tomorrow if Russia, the aggressor, pulled back. We don't know what's going to happen next. And we need to have realistic and credible answers to how any ceasefire, how any peace agreement will be lasting, just and enduring, because the last thing I want to see is a pause in the fighting that simply gives Putin the chance to come again. I think it's very important for the UK to be talking, obviously, with our European allies, as we do the whole time, and to the US, got a special relationship. But I do think there's a huge amount of overlay in terms of what we're trying to achieve, which is that lasting peace and dealing with the threat that is there from Russia.
Keir Starmer talking about the threat from Russia and what may be coming down the line in regard to peacekeeping troops being deployed to Ukraine. He'd need a parliamentary vote for that first, I would imagine. Colonel Simon Diggins is a former senior officer in the UK Army. He's also a defence analyst. Simon, good to talk to you again. There's been so much diplomacy, so much rapid action, words. Just decode it for us. What is actually happening here? Because a lot of people think that Keir Starmer, yes, he's speaking in strong words, but really, perhaps at the moment anyway, until these talks, if they are to happen in Saudi Arabia, it's really just about Trump and Putin, and to a lesser degree, actually, about Zelensky, with Starmer and others like Macron much further down the pecking order.
You're right, Peter, and good evening to you. I mean, the thing I would say is that the speed of events has taken everyone by surprise. Not that Trump and Putin were going to get together and talk about Ukraine. Trump made that very clear from the beginning. What's not understood and what we don't know is what preliminary talks they may have had through third parties, through intermediaries, and before he came there. So there may well be something more of a kind of cooked-up deal ready and waiting, which then going to be signed off, perhaps very quickly. And then
what do you think that might, sorry to interrupt you, Simon, but what do you think that might look like, especially if it's done rapidly? We'd heard from Trump previously that he'd sort out Ukraine, as he put it, in 24 hours. Clearly that didn't happen. But if it is a quick deal or something that is pre-agreed that they then swoop in and sign, well, what would that perhaps look like, do you think?
Well, I think it's something we already know about. I mean, they effectively accepting what Russia has taken as captured as becoming Russian territory, whether or not it's a de facto or de jure, but that's there. That Ukraine can't join NATO, and that there'll be no US troops on the ground. I think all those things are kind of given. I mean, the complaint about Trump was he kind of gave away the crown jewels before he even started. But I think those things were kind of understood. They may not have been publicly understood, and they may not have been publicly understood by the Europeans. But I think there was a clear understanding between Putin and Trump that was basically where they're going to go, and then everything else follows on from there.
Simon, I'm sorry, I'm having a struggle to hear you at the moment. I know our viewers and listeners can hear you, but for some reason I can't. Our people behind the scenes are working on that, and we'll come back to you in a second. We'll see if we get a call on and see if I can hear the caller. There is a technical issue. Apologies. Leslie says, when Starmer arrives in America, will they fly a reciprocal insulting balloon of Starmer wearing glasses and a suit? And Terry in Birmingham says, what if troops refuse to go to Ukraine, citing the ECHR and their rights to a family life or dislike of Ukrainian chicken nuggets, says Terry in Birmingham. There's lots of people responding to what Keir Starmer has been saying, to what Donald Trump has been saying as well. One of them is Felix in Crewe. Felix, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Basically, hello, P. How you doing?
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear the guests. I don't know whether it's a problem with my equipment, maybe my earpiece, which is here as well. It's funny, I can hear Ryan, the producer, but listen, there's a lot that we're talking about today. We're actually just going to go to a break now, see if we can sort out this technical issue, and we'll be back with you in just a few minutes to hear what Simon Diggins has to say. He is a colonel in the British Army. He has a lot of expertise in regard to Ukraine, so stay with us here on Talk.
to be really cautious before making declarations like that. We are still in a hot war. We've just seen Russia take about 600 square miles over winter from Ukraine. So under what circumstances is he saying this should happen? He's saying peacekeepers. That suggests once a peace deal's in place. But we're not looking for any peace deal here. We're looking for a deal that ensures that we don't see more war in Europe, not just a cessation of immediate fighting. So I think it's quite risky to suddenly announce that you're going to put British troops on the ground without having set out the parameters of what that looks like.
What we need to do is get rid of the bureaucratic nightmare that's the NHS. It really is a bureaucracy. If you review a patient's notes now, and I've been in the business 50 years as a doctor, so I can remember the past. Someone was in charge. The doctors were in charge of the patients, and they'd make sure they got a good journey through the bureaucracy of the system. Okay, when I was first a consultant, the costs were much lower than they are now of treating people, and most people were a lot younger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Apologies for the gremlins in the system there. Maybe it was the Russians taking me off air. Who knows? Anyway, we've got Simon Diggins back. Apologies for that. I think you could hear him, but I couldn't for some odd reason. But listen, Simon, are you there?
I am, Peter.
Ah, loud and clear. Marvellous. Apologies for cutting you off in your prime. So tell me what you think a deal, if a deal has been cooked up, what would it actually look like?
So I think there's some preconditions. One that effectively, whatever Russians taken is accepted by both sides, not necessarily in by right of law, but just as a fact on the ground. Secondly, that Ukraine will not join NATO, and I think the third element is some kind of understanding about what a Russian sphere of influence might look like. And I think the last one is almost the most dangerous of it, because it looks like a world being divided into spheres of influence. Now, it's happened before in our history, but that's a kind of sense of between what we've got there, with Trump sitting over the top, with Putin sort of dividing the world up from there. But I think those kind of understandings existed prior to what was declared publicly on Friday. And I think the shock really had been amongst the chancelleries how public and how late that the declarations have been. There's always been a suspicion there's been a conversation running between Trump and Putin, or at least not directly, but through intermediaries. But that looks like there's been something going on in the background, hence they've been able to do what they've been able to do so quickly.
So you're perhaps not surprised that that phone call happened last week. I suppose it wasn't out of the realms of possibility, given the very different type of diplomacy that Trump always does. Do you think others, perhaps Starmer as well, are struggling to catch up with it?
I think they are, because I think what it indicates really strongly is that a view of the world in which essentially Europe develops on its own particular liberal path under the umbrella of the Americans, and really can ignore defense, ignore security, and do its own thing. I mean, I think they've been very rudely awakened. The awakening started with the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, but still there was no sense that the Americans were going to pull out of it. But what Trump has done is essentially very clearly said, America first, America second, America third. And our American interests are going to come first. And still our political classes have struggled to understand that. They've actually been, the Americans, particularly Republicans, been very, very clear about it. Even the polite Americans, the ones who perhaps you might be more in tune with that international cosmopolitan order, people like Obama, people like Biden, have actually been saying for years to the Europeans, you really need to step up to the plate and sort out your own defences. You cannot rely on the Americans to do so. They disguised it, or they used it in the word of we're pivoting to the east. Our strategic challenger there being China, but again they've been very clear to Europeans. The expectation is that Europe will look after itself. America will still be your friend, but Europe is expected to look after itself. And that's actually what J.D. Vance said. I mean, people have been very upset about some of the rhetoric about our internal liberal democracies and the state of those. But essentially what he's been saying as well, you need to look after your own selves. We're not going to walk away completely, but we do expect you to be able to match what we're spending on defence. And they're spending well over 3%, often they're 4% on defence. In other words, they're looking after their security. You need to look after yours.
What do you make of, actually, within that paradigm of military spending. We've had quite a number of senior military leaders in the UK. Miraculously, their discussions seem to leak quite easily, and we know on Friday they discussed with Keir Starmer possibly putting up to 2.63, 2.75 amount of GDP, the amount of money the country earns. Trump is talking about 5%. In the context of all of that, and indeed just NATO in general, because I wonder how much autonomy we would have actually in regard to a peacekeeping troops if NATO says, right, we're going, this is it. How does that work?
Well, the money side, I think it really does need to become a needs-based, not GDP-based. Now, clearly there's a balance between that because the economy is what the economy is. But there has to be an assessment which says this is what the requirement is on the ground. This is what we need to do. To, for example, deploy a peacekeeping force to Ukraine. Let's call it a brigade, could be a brigade plus. Maintain what's supposed to be a brigade present in Estonia to deter any adventurism by Putin in that direction. It would be very nice to have a very clear, secure home base against our missile threats, air defence threats, and attacks on our cables. And we still have other responsibilities around the world. None of that is achievable with even 2.675 or whatever the latest Treasury figure that's going to come out. It's 3% plus. And that's going to get us to a point where we're starting to look after what we've got at the moment. And we're still hemorrhaging soldiers because people aren't staying, and then start to rebuild where we need to be. There's literally years, maybe a decade, of underinvestment in our defence, and we're now in a position where we're required to use our armed forces, and we don't have them available so to do.
Simon, just before you go, I just want to ask you about part of that discussion as well that some of those military leaders are having. We're hearing that they say, give us a national arsenal of high-tech weapons to beat Putin. How much of this is about traditional warfare, and how much is it about the sort of asymmetric nature of cyber warfare?
It's a bit of a mixture. I mean, what we have been able to do, and it sounds almost kind of cruel and detached, is look at how the fighting has gone in the Ukraine, and if you like, regard it as a kind of a ghastly kind of experiment, but one which we can look at how the employment of, say, mass armour works, or rather doesn't work in the environment, what weapon systems can be used. And I recall that the current Chief of General Staff, when he took over, General Sir Rowley Walker, talked about ensuring that the British Armed Forces would be 3 times more lethal in 5 years. Now, at that time, that wasn't necessarily premised on a significant increase in defence expenditure. So he was looking at different sorts of weapon systems, the kind of things that have been talked about in the press reports about sort of this high-tech arsenal. My only observation on this is, well, I have 2 observations. The first is actually some of these things may take a number of years to develop, and we don't have a number of years to develop them. So that will pressure us to purchase things off the shelf. And secondly, we cannot underestimate how any type of peacekeeping operation, particularly with complex terrain, particularly with a threat, just absorbs people. So you cannot just do a direct swap between technology and people. You also need to have numbers as well. I mean, the famous quotation is Lenin's, quantity has a quality all of its own. And that's something we can't afford to ignore at our peril.
Simon, thank you for the quantity and indeed quality of your analysis today. Appreciate that. That's Colonel Simon Diggins there, defence analyst and former senior officer in the UK Army as well. Leslie has said this is opening the door to an EU army that Labour and Blair has always wanted. Let's talk to Felix in Crewe. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Felix, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Felix. What would you like to say?
Basically, what's going on here is very simple. Donald Trump does not respect the politicians. He doesn't respect them, and he's just trying to be very diplomatic. That's the reason why he's not getting them involved. The problem is, when you're having a negotiation, you don't want noise and egos. 1 minute they're going on about let's win the war, and then 1 minute they're going about let's end the war. It doesn't work like that. And that's the reason. That's the only reason why he hasn't got them involved.
So what do you think about what Trump is doing then? Is he's essentially saying, look, there's a load of noise here, there's a load of extra players. There's only one person I actually need to speak to, and that's Putin. So I'm going to speak to him.
100%. And Trump believes because of their inexperience and their stupidity, that's why the war even got started in the first place. So you don't bring the people that start the fire to end the fire. So because they're putting so much ego and emotion into it. And the sad thing is, if I'm really honest with you, I feel sorry for the Ukrainians because If it was going to end this way, why did they even fight?
It's a very good point, and I think a lot of people will ask that, especially if they're giving away a lot of the land as well. But then will Putin give it up?
No, but you see, it is what it is at the moment, because the Ukrainians should not have even fought the war, because they had all these, what they call it, hawks, cheering them on and cheering, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Now they've got no country left. Now they're now back to the table where they were going to end up in the first place. But the reality is, we are where we are at the moment. So all this point saying we need to harm them, you can never beat Russia, because they've got nuclear bombs. You can.
Well, we have nuclear weapons as well, though.
I know what you mean, but the fact is, if you push them too far, do you think they would then welcome you to Moscow and hand over the keys to you?
Don't think so somehow. Felix, really interesting thoughts. Appreciate that, Felix, there in Crewe. Brian says, if Vance had told Europe to look after itself, why is the US taking over the peace talks? Peter says, why can we not get on with the Russians? I have Russian friends who love this country. They would send their children to school here, buy our goods and invest in the country, but they simply don't understand why a portion of our establishment are so Russia-phobic. Well, come on, Peter. I mean, Putin is a murderous dictator who has, he's poisoned people in this country. He's launched attacks on this country. That has happened. But anyway, I'm going to read out the rest of what Peter says, because we are the home of free speech and we have lots of different thoughts. So Peter says they simply don't understand, his friends, why a proportion of our establishment are so Russia-phobic, almost a psychotic hatred. We have really tried everything for the last 2 decades to provoke conflicts in their region. Peace is now on the table and the establishment is pulling their hair out. Didn't President Trump say, another person says, he was going to stop this war before he entered the White House, before the European leaders had been asleep? He actually said that he was going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. He hasn't done that, but listen, he's done an awful lot of things very, very quickly. Leslie says, Starmer grandstanding as usual. He should be sorting out our borders and our security. And on Ed Davey, interesting one, this is the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who says, a vote may well go through in regard to getting peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, but he has called Reform UK Trump bootlickers and says they'll probably vote against it. Martin in Whitby says, I understand President Trump has been told about what Ed Davey has posted today. His response is, Ed who? That is on the screen now. In fact, if you're looking, let me just read out the whole thing. In principle, there should be a vote in Parliament when troops are deployed. I'm confident all sides of the House, Ed Davey says, are likely to agree with the Prime Minister, apart from those Trump bootlickers in Reform. That is Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who, of course, 3.5 million people voted for the Liberal Democrats. How many voted for Reform again? Oh yes, 600,000 more at 4.1 million. And the system that we have, Reform got 5 MPs, the Liberal Democrats got 72. As the Americans say, perhaps even as Trump himself would say, go figure. Nigel is in Buckinghamshire. Let's give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Nigel, you're very welcome. What would you like to say?
Hello, Peter. Hi. Good
Hi
afternoon.
there. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I'd just like to say, these presidents of Europe, all the chiefs of Europe, to me, they're running around like headless chickens. They're going to have no say in anything whatsoever.
Are they scrambling?
They're scrambling. They've had 3 years. All of a sudden, Donald Trump's come in office for 3-4 weeks, and now we're talking peace.
Well, and I want to know, Nigel, first of all, I agree with everything you're saying, and first of all, I want to know, why don't you have a plan for peace? Why are you planning now? Why are you scrambling to catch up? Because no matter how long this war went on, we just got to ask, how is it going to end? And I think there are a lot of people in the establishment who are worried that this war is actually going to end. I don't know about you, Nigel, but I want wars to end. I don't want there to be wars. I don't know what the peace actually looks like. I don't want Putin to be the victor here by any stretch of the imagination, but I want people to stop dying in Ukraine.
I couldn't agree more. And Europe has done nothing for 3 years to stop this war. They've sent money, they've sent aid to kill more innocent people, both sides. Obviously, Ukraine, I want Ukraine to absolutely smash it. But I just don't know what they're posturing. The French presidents, our president, they're posturing.
Okay.
They're running about now for their own ego. They'll be eating lobster thermidor tonight and quaffing champagne.
Well, we will see. I wouldn't mind some of that myself, Nigel. I don't know about you. Nigel is in Buckinghamshire. Thank you for his thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk in just a minute to Barry Mizzen. He is the father of Jimmy Mizzen. Jimmy was murdered by an absolute thug, horrible person, who then got out of prison on licence and started putting what is called drill rap, this horrible, murderous rap, talking about killing people. And of course it was broadcast by who else but the BBC. He then went back into prison. The Ministry of Justice put him back in, as was absolutely the right thing to do. But now new TikTok rap clips have been posted. Should he be banned from social media? I know what my answer is. I wonder what yours is. Let me know your thoughts. 03444991000. But you're definitely going to want to hear this interview with Barry Mizzen. He's a really interesting campaigner who has taken the horrendous tragedy that happened in his family and in his life to his son, and he has done some incredible things. We're going to talk to him in just a second.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, you may remember the name of Jake Farry. I wanted you to forget his name because he is a total scumbag. He is back in prison. The person whose name I do want you to remember is Jimmy Mizzen, who was a very nice young man who was doing nothing. He was being a totally law-abiding person in a cafe, and Jake Farry murdered him. He murdered Jimmy Mizzen, and now this murderer, who was in prison, was then out of prison. He was rapping and doing this thing called drill music. The drill music was broadcast by the BBC, it was broadcast by the One Extra network. Then the Ministry of Justice found out about it, and we know that Jake Farry has been making money from this, and he was put back into prison, which is exactly where he should be for a very, very long time to come. He was rapping under a balaclava as a drill artist called 10. I don't know if you're familiar with drill, but it is just horrendous. It describes killing people, it describes murder. Now it has emerged that Jimmy Mizzen's killer has posted new TikTok rap clips despite his prison recall, and there is a very strong call, which I think should be stronger, for social media firms to ban him. Well, I'm delighted to talk now to Barry Mizzen, who is not only Jimmy Mizzen's father, but an indefatigable campaigner on a number of issues, particularly around young people. Barry, I don't know you, I've never met you, but you are a bit of a hero and I know about what you've done. And I just want to say thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme today. What is your reaction to the fact that this person is yet again putting clips up online, talking about horrendous things?
Yeah, I do wonder how he actually gets access to that. I think for myself, Peter, I didn't even know what drill music was till all this broke. And indeed, you're absolutely right. It's vile. I think it's inciting violence. I think that it should be taken down. It should be banned. As far as regulation goes on these social media platforms, it almost seems to be a free-for-all out there. As it's like a Wild West. Anyone can do anything they want without any sense of responsibility. And you do wonder, perhaps with the technology now, but is it time to forget perhaps the people putting this stuff up, but go for the actual social media hierarchy? You know, certainly if fines of £100,000 coming in if they didn't comply or didn't take things down, maybe that would give them a bit more sense of responsibility. I don't really know.
What is your message to TikTok, to the platform that is putting this stuff out there, that is hosting this?
Well, I think it all...
Oh, Barry's video has just frozen there. We'll see if we can get it back in just a second. But Barry is, of course, an anti-violence campaigner. He said previously that it feels a bit like this rapper and his friends are taunting us with this. And in the lyrics themselves, the lyrics included, "Stuck it on a man and watched him melt like Ben and Jerry. He's never been afraid to die. He said the same. They called his bluff." I mean, this guy is just awful, Jake Farry. He's now in prison, and I would ask the question as to how on earth this has got back on air. Do we have Barry back? Not just yet. We'll talk to him more in just a second, but certainly the social media sites, and I wonder what you think about this actually. 0344 499 1000. I mean, I believe in free speech. I believe in freedom of expression. But what I don't believe is that people should be able to incite violence and incite death, essentially, which is what has been happening with Jake Farry, this scumbag who's now back in prison. I don't know whether it's him who's put this up or who has put this up online, but clearly it is something that should not be there. Barry, we just lost you there, but perhaps you could, perhaps I could ask you again what your message is to TikTok and perhaps other networks, social networks who are hosting this kind of material.
Well, so I think in all humanity, this should not be allowed to be uploaded, and if it does get on there, then get it taken down as soon as possible. Maybe an incentive or a heavy financial burden on the suppliers, on the TikToks and all the others, maybe make them respond more than they seem to be at the moment. But it seems to be an absolute free-for-all, Peter. Put up what you like, say what you like, and no consequences, and surely that needs to change.
It must add insult to injury, especially with what happened with the BBC a few weeks ago. That was sorted out, I suppose, maybe not entirely to your satisfaction, Barry, in regard to Jake Farry being back in prison. But I wonder as well, what about the proceeds of crime? Because presumably, I mean, there's legislation about that, about proceeds of crime, and presumably there could be some form of prosecution in regard to that. I wonder what you think about that aspect of things.
Well, again, I think for us, the fact that he could be getting more well-known, if you like, some sort of fame, as terrible as that fame would actually be, that kind of pains us. You know, so someone's putting this up and then they're getting the recognition, and who knows, with this day and age, the recognition can probably bring in vast amounts of money. And nobody should be making money out of the proceeds of crime. So again, is that something that needs to be looked at? I mean, I don't know if the gaining from the proceeds of crime is actually illegal. It'd be interesting to find out.
There is the Proceeds of Crime Act, and I would say that's something that's perhaps worth looking into. Listen, I don't know about you, Barry. I don't really want to talk about Farry because he's just such an absolutely horrible person. The person I actually would quite like to talk about a little bit is you and the work that you do through the Jimmy Mizzen Foundation. Can you just let us know what that is? Because you've taken this absolutely horrendous tragedy in 2008 and you've done some amazing things with us. Just tell us about your work.
Yeah, I think the main part of what we do is myself and my wife, we travel around the country. We've done quite a few long trips recently. We speak in schools predominantly, but we do talk to adult groups. Over the years, Peter, we've actually spoken in prisons as well. We have a very simple message, one of forgiveness, peace and hope. For us, it's trying to speak with young people, maybe to get them to start thinking differently about certain things. But also for adults, let's try and think differently about all these issues. But there have to be some positive voices somewhere, because it seems to be doom and gloom all the time, just about everything. Where are the positive things? Where are the positive voices? I think change can happen, but it changes with the individual, doesn't it? Changes with me, changes with you.
I think Barry's just frozen again there, but I think his message was very clear there in regard to his incredible work there in remembering Jimmy, who was murdered in a South East London bakery by Jake Farry, who is now back in prison. How this stuff is getting on TikTok, I would be very interested to find out. And Brian says Barry is such a courageous bloke. And Jane says this absolutely should be banned. The BBC are a joke, talk about double standards in reporting news, the good, the bad, and the absolute nonsense. And yeah, there's just a lot about that. And I think that if you do want to learn a little bit more about that, go to the Jimmy Mason Foundation and see the kind of work that Barry's doing. A very good friend of mine who used to work for James Brokenshire, the politician, used to run some races for them and raise some money for them, and I sponsored him for that, as did many, many other people. We're going to talk more about Ukraine. We're going to take your calls, texts and tweets, and we're going to talk about firms planning job cuts, because the cost of actually employing people, well, that is rising because of what Rachel Reeves has done, and now we know the outworkings of that and how things will be in just about 6 weeks' time when a lot of these tax rises come in from the 6th of April. We're going to find out what's going to happen and what it could mean for your job as well. Stay with us here on Talk.
In the EU, they had the role of being the bridge between America and Europe, but because they were in both camps. But because of Brexit, we lost that role. There is no bridge. Trump is already actively excluding Britain from negotiations. He's even excluding Zelensky. Right. So they're having a meeting over there. They don't really know what they're talking about because they're not privy to any negotiation minutes. So what are they going to be discussing?
What we need to do is get rid of the bureaucratic nightmare that's the NHS. It really is a bureaucracy. If you review a patient's notes now, and I've been in the business 50 years as a doctor, so I can remember the past. Someone was in charge. The doctors were in charge of the patients, and they'd make sure they got a good journey through the bureaucracy of the system. Okay, when I was first a consultant, the costs were much lower than they are now of treating people, and most people were a lot younger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you so much for watching and listening to this programme. One person who does basically every time I'm on is a wonderful woman called Carol in Liverpool. She's having a bit of a rough time at the moment with her health, and I just want to say, Carol, I hope you're feeling better soon, and I hope that you can put a smile on your face, and maybe watching and listening to this programme might even do that. So Carol, I just hope you're feeling better, and 100% very, very soon indeed. Thank you also to Angela, who says Ed Davey should be careful what he says about Reform UK. This is the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who has said that Reform UK are Trump bootlickers. That's what he says. Because if they were to ask the dim libs, as Angela says, to form our government, Davey would jump at the chance just like Clegg did. They certainly won't get on the front bench on their own. Brian says, I'd like to know if peace breaks out, who's going to pay for rebuilding Ukraine? Maybe that could be brought into the negotiations. Stephen Stokes says, I just remember Russia fired a ballistic missile at Ukraine last year. Just wasn't armed with a nuclear warhead, it was armed conventionally. We've tested our nuclear capability twice in the last decade and it has failed. We're in a mess. Well, Steve, I don't know about you, I don't want anybody to be involved in nuclear war, but we should at least know whether we can do it or not, which is a fair point. We'll take more of your calls in a minute, but I want to talk to Jonathan Portes first, who is a former chief economist under Gordon Brown. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today, because there's a lot of people worried, especially firms, about job cuts as employment costs rise, and we know that a lot of this change is coming in at the start of the new financial year. Firms talking, I spoke to one yesterday actually, Jonathan, that was saying, are we going to have to cut jobs or recruit fewer people ahead of those rises to national insurance payments and in many cases wages as well, when it comes to all sorts of rises, but not least the national living wage. How do you see this situation, Jonathan, and what do you think small firms should do?
I think, first of all, we should be clear that for the smallest firms, this actually isn't a tax rise at all, remember. In fact, there's a slight tax gain for the very smallest firms. So if you look at the numbers, about half of all firms will end up paying significantly more tax, but 250,000 firms will actually pay significantly less tax, and then another 800 or so won't see any significant increase or decrease because there's a bit of an extra tax break for the very smallest firms. So it's actually mostly middle and larger firms that will be hit. They will actually see a significant hit. You're quite right there. Whether that will translate into job cuts, I think, remains to be seen. Remember, the national living wage had the largest single increase ever last year, I think. And we didn't actually see a significant fall in employment as a result of that, despite the concerns. In practice, I think we find that while firms, quite understandably, do tend to talk up the increase of these tax and wage increases, when it comes to it, the impacts aren't quite as catastrophic as some people suggest.
Do you think there's scaremongering around this, Jonathan? Does people just need to take a deep breath?
I do think people should take a deep breath. I don't think that businesses and firms are scaremongering particularly. They are in a difficult position, some of them, and there will certainly be some impact. I think a lot of the headlines and some of the politics around this probably are scaremongering. Remember, the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the independent watchdog that's supposed to analyse the impact of these things, did say that this tax rise would cost jobs. It estimated it would cost the equivalent of 50,000 jobs overall. But that's in the context of an environment, an economy, when they also projected that overall employment would actually grow by about 1 million over the next 4 or 5 years, just because of migration, demographic change, and
But actually, that brings it back, does it not, Jonathan, to this point, not just about GDP, but also GDP per capita, how much we're making per person, because so many economists see immigration as a way to help the economy, and in some cases it does, some cases it doesn't, but actually there are lots of people who are really genuinely worried about their jobs in this economy.
That's right. I mean, I think GDP per capita, wages, productivity, those are the things that ultimately matter for people's living standards. As it happens, as far as we can tell, recent immigration has, if anything, been slightly good for GDP per capita, because most of the people coming here are either working or they're students contributing through their fees, and they tend to be of working age, unlike those of us who are either children or retired, who don't contribute very much for obvious reasons. But it's absolutely right that the real challenge for the UK is boosting productivity and hence wages over time, and that does take time. We've had 15 years of very low productivity, very low public and private investment, which of course is essential to growing productivity, not to mention Brexit, which has also impacted productivity significantly. So turning around that takes time.
Do you think Labour were wrong to bet the farm on growth? They said their plans essentially meant that they could do them if they got 2.5% growth. We know from every indicator, every forecast, that growth is nowhere near 2.5%, nor is it going to be over the course of the Parliament.
I think setting numerical targets, or even the target that they set, which was about growth compared to the rest of the G7, is pretty futile. So I think that sort of just gives the wrong message. However, in the sense of betting the farm on growth, in the sense of saying, well, we need to think about what policies will drive growth in the medium to long term. And that's what really matters in terms of living standards and being able to fund decent quality public services, which are things people really care about. They're clearly, I think that's basically right. That is the most important thing from an economic point of view. But the test is not talking about it. The test is actually delivering it. And as you say, that certainly hasn't happened yet. To be fair, these things take time. You don't turn around an economy overnight, and you certainly, or indeed in 6 months.
Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Portis there, former chief economist under Gordon Brown. Lots of talk of money and the economy. Well, time now to find out how you could be within the chance, be in with a chance, I should say, of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, thank you to Barry. He's been in touch. He says Ed Davey should be disciplined by the Speaker for his comments. Of course he won't be, because he lacks the same class and manners as Davey and is totally biased, says Barry. I actually don't agree. I think Lindsay Hoyle is actually a very good Speaker. I think he's done a pretty good job. Also, he's a cat person as well, so he'll always be in my good books for that. Peter has been in touch, 0344 499 1000. He's in Dorset, and he wants to put across his thoughts on Ukraine and the defence budget. Peter?
Good evening.
Good evening, hi.
Hi there. I don't quite understand the situation. We've got a situation in when the Cold War was going on, that our budget was up to close to 7% for armaments and defence. And this is when we were packed up with Americans in town, and everybody was in town near the Berlin Wall and all the rest of it. What is this discussion about 2 or 2.3 or 2.6% in defence? When is the West, Europe, going to liven up and smell the coffee? Because the coffee granules are being ground in front of their noses. I mean, look at some of the countries that are close to the border, like Finland. Look at these people who've got reservist armies. What are we doing?
What should we do, Peter? Peter, what do you think we should do?
First of all, we should not be shelving things like aircraft carriers. We should not be shelving anything. We should. The Russians have been about outside our borders, making our aircraft go into the air, putting submarines in. We've seen the stories over the last number of years. They're mucking about. If the migrants are lucky, soon enough, they're getting a lift in to the UK on a submarine. I mean, basically, the situation is absolutely crazy that anybody is talking about anything at the moment with what's going on. This appeasement they're talking about with Putin, the situation
is it appeasement or is it negotiation?
It doesn't matter which way you look at it. The fact is, if there's a break in the proceedings in Ukraine, the fact is that it should be giving the Europeans and the British enough call to get cracking in building arms and sending arms. getting if you put troops in Europe, if Starmer's going to put troops in Europe, which is really a laugh thinking from this government, but the fact is,
he says he is. He says he's happy to put peacekeeping troops in Europe. He said that today.
Yeah, and how's he going to replace the ones he's taken out of the UK?
Yeah, and General Lord Dannatt as well is saying that that's actually probably impossible in regard to even the numbers we have. Peter, good points there, interesting points from Peter in Dorset. 0344 499 1000, the number to call. Georgina is the next person who's going to give us the benefit of her wisdom in London this time. Georgina, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Thank you very much, Peter. I think Keir Starmer needs to get his own house in order and his policies before embarking on sending our wonderful boys and girls in the forces to Ukraine. The British people need to be consulted and their views taken into consideration before he does this. Our forces are inadequately funded as it is, without adequate artillery to embark on such a drastic action. President Trump neither needs and probably doesn't even want Mr. Starmer to be the middleman in this very delicate situation, as Mr. Starmer's track record for solving problems in the UK leaves a lot to be desired.
I think that's a very good point, and I wonder. Well, I've a couple of things to ask you, even before we get to the next bit of your points here, Georgina. The first one is on Starmer, and you're saying that Trump probably doesn't want him to be a middleman, a bridge, as he has called it, front page of the Times today. Prime Minister will act as bridge to Trump in peace talks. Why would he want him to be a bridge necessarily when he hasn't needed a bridge? The only bridge he's needed is a telephone call to Vladimir Putin, which happened last week.
Absolutely. This is a bridge over troubled waters, and this is not President Trump's first rodeo. He's more than capable of dealing with this problem himself, and he is doing a wonderful job as it is.
On the second point that you've raised there, you say that our views should be taken into account. How should our views be taken into account in regard to if we send peacekeepers to Ukraine? How should that happen, Georgina, do you think?
Well, you've got to take into consideration, it's easy for Keir Starmer to make such announcements when he will be using taxpayers' money to fund it, and the British people's sons and daughters to be the boots that land into Ukraine to help sort this mess out.
We've had a Davy already today saying, well, there should be a vote in Parliament. The people's representatives should actually have a say in this. It's likely they would say yes, but nonetheless, is it actually for the Prime Minister simply to intone, right, we're doing this?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think the Prime Minister's interference is wanted in this situation. He wasn't even invited to the negotiations regarding this problem, and as for Mr. Davey, I mean, he shouldn't be insulting MPs and supporters and their supporters in the House of Commons.
He called Reform UK Trump bootlickers. What do you think about that?
I think that's very naughty. I think, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I think that some opinions should be kept to yourself. And I think he's in a position of trust. You don't behave like that in the Palace of Westminster. You do not do that. It's
perhaps have a little bit more decorum. Georgina, great points there, really interesting points. Thank you. Let's go to Lancashire and Andrew, who's given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Andrew, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Oh, good evening, sir.
Hello.
Well, Mr. Russian man, he's a madman, isn't he? They've lost over 1 million men, haven't they? What they're saying, so 2,000 a day. They're just shooting cannon fodder. Anyway, British Armed Forces, I've done my little bit. In 1980, we had 220,000.
Yeah.
With reserves,
It's just very, very different these days. Do we have the boots on the ground, or the boots that could be deployed on the ground?
Well, the point we're putting forward, I mean, this is what I'm thinking. We should have had national service back years ago to have an army.
Well, it's really interesting you mention that, because Barry's been in touch and said the population of the UK between 18 and 40 need to start working on their fitness. Do you think national service could come back? Conscription, perhaps?
Do seriously, if we don't do nothing about this country, that the army now, was it 72 million?
Something like that, yeah. It's certainly in the tens of thousands.
100,000 with the reserves. That's all you've got. It's not even big enough. And then you're going to go to Ukraine, you'll need 30,000.
Yeah.
You need to do 10,000.
Certainly, and you need, as Lord Dannett was saying the other day, Andrew, you need to do that rotation of those people. They can't all be there all the time for an indefinite period of time. They need rest, they need recovery, and so on.
Yes, definitely. You need a Navy there and you need an Air Force there. So it's not just one or the other.
Yeah.
It's a multiplication what you're going to need. And this, I mean, national service, basically, we need an army, we need a Navy, we need an Air Force.
What about the cyber aspect of this, Andrew? What do you think about all of that?
You know, well, obviously, I'm going back 80s. This is today, like, it's drone warfare, different warfare, what's going on, you know. Everything. It's a totally different war. Well,
it is, and some would argue that actually fewer boots on the ground are actually needed as a result of that, because sometimes, you know, an army is smaller because we don't need as many as we have previously. We don't need as much manpower when we have some of the aspects of the cyber warfare. I mean, what do you think of that, Andrew?
Well, what about what's happened in Russia? 2,000 men a day.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah. You know, 2,000, 10,000 men. What's that going to last 5 days? Seriously. Then you've got North Koreans as well, you know, and that's an open book. They've got 100,000, 200 million. They'll just throw them in the cannon fodder, you know, so...
And they seem to have sort of almost unending resources, Andrew. Some really interesting points there, that's Andrew. You've
got China as well. You know?
Very good point, Andrew. We're just going to leave it there because we've got to go to the news. But thank you very much. That's Andrew in Lancashire there. Thanks also to Louise, who's been in touch, and Jonathan Portas says what he forgets is more low wages still made up with working tax credits and council rent benefits, more for the taxpayer and people stuck on benefits. We're going to talk more about Ukraine. We're also going to talk about Israel as well. We'll get more of your calls, texts and tweets. Be sure to give me a ring in the break here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. We're talking about Ukraine and the thoughts of Keir Starmer saying that we can be a bridge for America, also that we could possibly deploy peacekeeping troops, our boys and girls, on the ground in Ukraine in the event of any deal. We'll talk in a second to the chairman of the Defence Committee in Parliament. He's also the Labour MP for Slough. We'll get your views and thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000. Believe it or not, it is 500 days since the Hamas terrorist, murderous, horrendous attacks on Israel. We'll talk to Nicole Lampert about that, and indeed we will speak to a defence expert as well, former head, Conservative actually, former chairman of the Defence Committee, Tobias Elwood, a little bit later on in the hour. But the main thing is your thoughts, your views on all of this. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring for a live discussion on the air. 0344 499 1000. That's the main number to get your voice on Talk. Plenty to discuss between now and when Kevin O'Sullivan comes up at 7 o'clock. Stay with us. Well, let's just remind ourselves of what the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has said about a peacekeeping deal in Ukraine. This is the Prime Minister speaking today.
We must continue to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, whatever happens next, and to make sure that if there is peace, and we all want peace, that it is lasting. This isn't just about the front line in Ukraine, it's the front line of Europe and of the United Kingdom. It's about our national security, and I think that we need to do more. We need to step up in terms of our collective response in Europe. And by that I mean capability, by that I mean playing our full part when it comes to the defence of the sovereignty of Ukraine if there's a peace agreement, and of course when it comes to funding and training.
The Prime Minister also addressed the threat to Ukraine from Russia.
We could have a resolution tomorrow if Russia, the aggressor, pulled back. We don't know what's going to happen next, and we need to have realistic and credible answers to how any ceasefire, how any peace agreement will be lasting, just and enduring, because the last thing I want to see is a pause in the fighting that simply gives Putin the chance to come again. I think it's very important for the UK to be talking, obviously, with our European allies, as we do the whole time, and to the US, got a special relationship. But I do think there's a huge amount of overlay in terms of what we're trying to achieve, which is that lasting peace and dealing with the threat that is there from Russia.
Well, that is the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, speaking today. He's in Paris at the moment with Emmanuel Macron and many other European leaders, talking about what is going on in Ukraine. And perhaps, I want to get into this in a second actually, perhaps some of the diplomacy that may well be going on over their heads. Let's speak to Tanmanjeet Singh Desai, who is the chairman of the Defence Committee in Parliament. He's also the Labour MP for Slough. Tan, thank you for joining me this evening on Talk. I wonder what you make of what the Prime Minister was saying there.
Look, I think we should be under no illusion that Russia has made a huge strategic blunder with its illegal invasion, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, and that has led to colossal death and destruction. So we need to make sure that we stand firm with our friends and allies in Ukraine. It is for our continent's security, European security, because we need to be under no illusion that what is happening at the moment, the front line of UK security, of UK defence, is in Ukraine. And I've just recently come from the Munich Security Conference. There is a lot of consternation about Russia's continued invasion. We all want peace. We want to make sure that whether it's the Americans, whether it's the Europeans, working together with our Ukrainian friends, we need to ensure that there is peace. But it also needs to be on Ukraine's terms. We cannot have any resolution to this without Ukrainian involvement.
Do you worry that Ukraine's voice might not be heard here, that this might be too bilateral simply between President Trump and Vladimir Putin?
That was what the initial concern was, and I know that President Zelensky also mentioned that during his speech. When I was in the hall, I heard him loud and clear that they believe that there should be no resolution for Ukraine without Ukraine.
Should the Americans back off a bit here, Tan?
So what the Americans, from my understanding of it, is that President Trump has confirmed that Ukraine will be very much involved in that process, and it was good to hear that also. But we need to make sure that we are also stepping up to the plate. Peter, it's imperative that at this juncture, with the potential reduction of American presence and with their focus more in terms of the Indo-Pacific tilt on other parts of the world, we need to make sure that as a country that we grasp the moment. This is our moment to show leadership, and I hope that our Prime Minister and our government will be doing that. We need to, as the Prime Minister is doing, convening with other leaders within Europe, but then we have a very important role to be that bridge between the US and other European NATO.
But why? Why do we need to be that bridge? Because you may just simply see from the phone call last week that President Putin doesn't need, or thinks perhaps, that he doesn't need Europe. He has simply picked up the phone, spoken to Vladimir Putin, and negotiating directly with him.
I think that he is under no illusion after what has come out of the Munich Security Conference that European NATO allies will very much be involved, and that is why that meeting has been called for in Paris, and thereafter...
So why are they not going to Saudi Arabia then, or should they be invited there?
I think initially, as President Trump said, that he reached out to his Russian counterpart. Obviously, they're in discussions, but ultimately it will be other NATO allies, including the UK, who I know will be pivotal in that. Our Defence Committee recently visited both Estonia and Finland. They are on the border with Russia. They were at pains to say as well that we want to see that UK leadership, that UK involvement, because it's only collectively that we can tackle this imperialistic designs of Russia and that aggression. And that is why there should be no resolution for our continent without us being involved.
And that may well be the case, Tan, but is it not also the case that essentially many of the people at the Munich Security Conference, the NATO establishment, many of these different governments, including your leader Keir Starmer meeting in Paris today, they've been bounced into this by Donald Trump, haven't they? They had no inclination or even desire to have these kind of conversations before Trump bounced them.
Well, look, President Trump, during the election campaign, he was of the firm opinion that he wanted to facilitate peace. So we all knew that this was coming. We also knew that...
Well, why was it not prepared for them?
Our American allies and friends wanted increased defence spending, and that's something that I've been calling upon the Prime Minister during the recent liaison committee meeting, as well as on the floor of the House with the Secretary of State for Defence, that we need to chart our way to 2.5% spending on defence. We need to also encourage and implore upon other NATO allies to get to at least that 2% target, because some of them are not meeting that target. And that's why our American friends are not as happy as they would like to be, because they feel that some of the NATO allies are not stepping up to the plate. And so we've got to show that leadership by getting ASAP to that 2.5% target.
Is that enough? Because there have been numerous leaders, army and other armed forces leaders, who met the Prime Minister on Friday and said that even 2.5% of GDP, what the country makes, would not be enough for our military's budget.
Look, I fully appreciate that whether it's the Americans at just above 3% or whether it's in terms of Poland above 4%, there are now calls for differing numbers, whether it's 3.5%, whether it's...
But the leaders of the leaders, sorry to interrupt you, Tan, but what is clear is that the leaders of those leading the army, the Navy, the Air Force, they disagree with you. They think it should be higher.
Well, look, I think first of all, what the government has is its manifesto commitment. We need to make sure that they come good in terms of that. We need to accelerate that because of the...
Oh, he's frozen. Let's see if we can get him back. That's Tan Desai there, who is the chairman of the Select Committee on Defence. We'll see if we can get him back. Stuart says the front line of UK security is the Channel. Deploy forces there before Ukraine. Jane says, just wish the UK Prime Minister would put as much effort into the UK as he does into Ukraine. Many feel our own Prime Minister doesn't care about his own citizens. That's been echoed on a number of different programmes that I have done. There are a number of people who feel that. Simon in Essex says, what about starting with our own borders, our country? I'm sick of this nonsense. The globalist propaganda about this war is a disgrace. I would rather have Putin as a leader than Keir Stalin, says Simon. I mean, it's really, really interesting. Lloyd and Keithley in Dorset says, I think Lloyd Keithley from Dorset, Keithley is of course in Yorkshire, the situation is clearly about good versus evil now. NATO and Ukraine want this war to carry on. Their idea of peace will only get Putin's backup, and that is after all why the war started in the first place. The only man to sort out the situation is Trump. He will not have Europe involved in peace talks because he and Putin are the only two to actually put an end to this. I'm a veteran, says this person. I would happily join the reserve force, but after exemplary service, you have to jump through several hoops to rejoin. It's ridiculous. My fitness isn't what it used to be, but I would be capable of doing other vital tasks to support combat personnel. It would make it easier to rejoin. And Andy says, good evening, Peter. I've just been listening to you and the last person on the phone and talk about warfare, modern technology. I think this is perhaps a couple of guests ago, says Andy. He says, do we need boots on the ground? That was the question we were asking to one of our callers. Well, yes, we do need boots on the ground, because once you start a wall, the first thing they're going to take out is technology. If they don't have the technology, you will need boots on the ground. We'll try to get Tan Desai back to continue that conversation. Definitely want to ask him about Ed Davey, perhaps even JD Vance as well. But for the meantime, let's speak to Sharon in Peterborough. Sharon, what do you think about sending troops to Ukraine? What would you do?
I'm totally against it, Peter. I'm more worried about the enemy within this country, and we've got to be careful.
I think a lot of people agree with you, Sharon.
Yeah, and I think everybody knows who I'm talking about. We need our troops here too. Who's going to protect us? I'm a lady in my 60s on my own with my little dog.
Do you feel protected, Sharon? Do you feel the forces of law and order are protecting you there in Peterborough?
No, I don't see anybody. I don't see police. I was married to a policeman. My son is in the RAF and he's actually leaving in March. He's done 22 years. And I'm glad, because my son isn't going to go, and whether it's peace or not, Peter, things happen.
Yeah.
And I'm not having my son die by all these hotels, and we've got one near where we live, and all these hotels are full of illegal immigrants, and I will say it, who are getting paid for everything, and my son to give up his life, maybe, possibly. And why should our boys and girls go? I feel that Zelensky has wanted things like this to happen for a long time. He's been pushing and pushing and pushing.
How does your son feel now he's leaving the RAF? Does he feel that things have changed a lot over the past couple of decades?
Oh gosh, yeah. I remember when we took him in for his basic training, they were all going in with their little ironing boards, and obviously he's 20.
You were a proud mum that day, Sharon, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, Peter, it makes men of them. And I agree with Andrew who rang in. And I think there should be a national service now, like the Israelis do. And I think these illegals in the hotels, they either do that, or if they love Britain so much, or they go.
Yeah, maybe they should do national service as well. Well, Sharon, will you pass on a message from all of us and thank your son for his 2 decades service to this country?
Thank you. No,
really, I'm sure you're proud on that first day, and I'm sure you're very proud now. That's Sharon in Peterborough there. She mentioned Israel and how they do national service. We're actually going to be talking about Israel in just a second, because believe it or not, it is 500 days since those horrendous Hamas terrorist attacks. There are still 60 or so people who are being held hostage by Hamas. There's been countless dead in Gaza as well, real and horrendous innocent people killed there. I'll shed absolutely zero tears for Hamas terrorists. and we know that Israel is preparing to receive the bodies of 4 hostages held by Hamas terrorists in Gaza. They're working to bring back another 6 living hostages. We've seen that there, of course, have been some who have returned. We'll reflect on that. We'll reflect on Ukraine as well. We'll get your calls, texts and tweets as well between now and 7 o'clock. So stay with us here on Talk.
Well, yes, but of course they already are. I mean, they poisoned some people in Salisbury a few years ago. They routinely interfere with disinformation to subvert our public discourse. You know, there are plenty of allegations around cyber attacks and whatever else. So, you know, Russia already regards the UK as a thought leader in Europe and sort of a leading rallier, if you like, of European opposition.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, believe it or not, it is 500 days since Hamas terrorists carried out those absolutely horrendous attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. A war happened afterwards. We know that about 60 or so hostages are still being held by Hamas terrorists. What we do know is that some of them have been released. One of them is a man called Keith Siegel. This is what he had to say on his release.
I was held for 484 days in unimaginable conditions, and every single day felt like it could be my last. President Trump, you are the reason I am home alive. You are the reason I was reunited with my beloved wife, 4 children, and 5 grandchildren.
Well, thank goodness Keith is now back with his family. I did interview Aviva Siegel previously, his wife. She was held for over 50 days. I think it was about 54 days that she was held by Hamas terrorists, and she spoke very, very movingly to one of my programmes about that. Keith is now back. When he is ready to be interviewed, I don't think he's there quite yet, because of course there's such psychological, physical, horrendous torture that these people have been through. But he spoke about President Trump and how this has, President Trump becoming president has really changed things in regard to the Middle East, has really changed things in regard to where things are. I want to speak to Nicole Lambert now, who is a freelance journalist, and she does great work around this. Nicole, great to talk to you. And I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's also far too easy to believe that it's 500 days since the horrendous Hamas terrorist attacks, when people were burned, raped, murdered, taken hostage, as we know. Of course, as well, the dreadful, dreadful massacre, the worst actually since the Holocaust, that was visited on the Israeli people. There's been a dreadful war since. Many, many people on both sides have been killed, including many innocent Gazan citizens. I'm not going to shed a single tear for any Hamas terrorists who have been killed. They have lived by the sword, and if they're going to die by the sword, that's okay with me. But really, 500 days in, I wonder where we are. Perhaps you could give me a sense of what people in Israel have been doing as well. I understand there have been fasting, there have been rallies. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Hi, thank you for having me on, Peter. In Israel, I think in some ways they still are living on October 7, 2023, that life can't really move on until those hostages are returned. Obviously, thanks to Trump, whether you love him or hate him or whatever else, the deal has happened and hostages are being released in all sorts of states, as we've seen. Today, there have been demonstrations, there have been fasts, and people, certainly the hostage families, are determined to try and keep this deal going. We're coming to the end of the first part of the ceasefire deal.
Things have been very fragile, haven't they? I mean, there were worries that things may fall apart even a few days ago.
I think that things could still fall apart. So what we do know is that Hamas have just said that on Thursday they're going to be releasing 5 bodies. They haven't said who the bodies are. Altogether, they've said that 8 of the remaining, I think it's 14, are dead, but no one knows exactly who it is. I'm thinking,
and that's a form of psychological torture for those who are waiting, isn't it? Because we know Hamas do this. We know there was one of the hostages previously whose wife and child had been murdered, and he wasn't told about that. He was given false hope. We know that, there's a lack of information here about these people, and for the dreadful, dreadful ordeal that so many people have been through, this just gets worse, and Hamas, turn the screws and make the torture even worse.
I think we have to ask ourselves how we've allowed this to happen, how we've allowed this, the psychological torture is just a part of it, but we're 500 days on, and how on earth are we allowing this to happen? And that still, despite all these days of war, Israel is having to swap dangerous prisoners for these civilians.
And hundreds of them in many cases, hundreds of people, murderers and people who have been working, who've carried out absolutely awful crimes, who are being given back in exchanges, essentially. And of course, there's the false equivalence by some of the media, including some media here in the UK who should know a lot better, who instead of calling these people prisoners are calling them hostages, which they absolutely are not.
It's absolutely disgusting that people are trying to make any sort of equivalence. Some of these people are mass murderers, are terrorists that have killed many, many people, and they're being swapped for innocent people. I'm sure that many of your viewers will know that there are still 2 babies left in Gaza and their mother, the Bibas boys, and we don't know what's happened to them. We don't know whether they're going to be returning in body bags on Thursday, whether the torture will continue to be played out. And I compare it with what's happened in Yemen, and 7 UN people were taken hostage by the Houthis, and as a result, the UN have stopped humanitarian aid into that area. And compare and contrast with the lack of care that people have made with these hostages. We saw in our own streets people tearing down these hostage posters, pretending that it's some sort of propaganda. And even though we're seeing them coming out, it absolutely staggers me that that media organisations dare to compare it to what is coming out of Israeli prisons.
How have things shifted with Trump in charge, do you think? Are you more hopeful for some sort of resolution and for the remaining hostages who are alive to get back?
Well, so talks are about to start for the second phase of the deal, which will see more hostages returned. And it's so fragile. I mean, no one can know what's going on in Trump's mind, and he seems to change his mind quite regularly. So the fact that the lives of the hostages are beholden to this man in particular feels worrying. Of course, not just him, but Hamas, as we talked about, with all their psychological terror, and Netanyahu has his own reasons for prolonging the war. So it feels like we are, even when we get to the end of this part of the deal, there'll be about another 50 hostages left, and most of them are young men. We know that they're being tortured, they're being shackled, they're not being fed. So the pressure in Israel will be massively on to return those hostages, but there'll have to be more demands being met by Hamas, the terror group, in order for that to happen.
Well, many people forget, of course, and they shouldn't because it's the only one in the area, is that Israel is a democracy. People have lots and lots of different views. There are lots of different pressures that are put on the government, and I don't think anybody is arguing that Benjamin Netanyahu has done an absolutely brilliant job over the past 500 days. I wonder just about the pressure on the Israeli government. You talked about Netanyahu and his own reasons there himself and how he has acted. We know a lot of hostage families and others have put a lot of pressure on him. I wonder about his position in all of this.
It's hard to know. He's probably, he's right wing, but he's much more centre right than some of the far right people that he's in government with, and they have been very against any sort of deal for the hostages. And anyone in Israel, whether they're left or right, will admit that it's a terrible deal because more than 1,000 terrorists and people in Israeli prisons are going to be released for these 33 hostages. So there's that sort of pressure. Netanyahu has a court case that is ongoing at the moment. It could see him imprisoned unless he's prime minister. So there's that sort of thing going on. And if it goes to the next stage of the deal, it may be that his government falls apart. So there are all these different things going on in Israeli society, aside from the fact that any sort of hostage deal is completely tenuous and no one knows what's going to happen in Gaza and to the Gazan people next.
Nicole, thank you. That's Nicole Lambert there, who is a freelance journalist. Really appreciate her analysis and insight there. 500 days since those awful terrorist attacks by Hamas. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch on all sorts of issues. Chris says Tan Desai was saying they knew this was coming as Trump was talking about it in his election. So why did Starmer go to France as soon as he got into office, then to give Ukraine permission to use long-range missiles? Trump is for peace. The EU wants to carry on. Well, Chris, you hit on a number of very, very interesting bits there, and I did ask Tan Desai about that in regard to if they knew this was coming, why didn't they prepare for it? Why are they scrambling now? Why are they now saying, oh, we're going to be a bridge to Europe, we're going to sort this all out? What do you think about this? 0344 499 1000. Plenty of time between now and 7 o'clock when Kevin O'Sullivan comes up. He's here for 3 hours between 7 and 10, of course. Loads to discuss with him, but to discuss this with me, give me a shout. Ernie says, hi Peter, has Starmer forgotten that we've left Europe? We shouldn't answer to them anymore, and I'm sure that they will do what they like without us poking our oar in. He needs to come home and sort the mess out he's created over here before he goes gallivanting all over the world at taxpayers' expense. We can support Ukraine in our own way, says Ernie. Well, we know that Starmer is going to America soon to talk to Trump about that. The Army Reserve in Tynemouth has spaces for 50 armoured drivers, get paid to get car, truck and fuel tanker licences, says this person. Gemma says, can you get this across to the talk listeners and elsewhere? Ground troops here would be at risk from overhead rockets, drones, bombs, not to mention cyber warfare, says Gemma. And Peter, another Peter, says, when I joined the Army, I was so proud, believing it to be the best army in the world. I would have followed any order and done anything for this country, because then we had different leaders who cared for this country. Now we have unqualified imbeciles purporting to be leaders, case in point the globalist Starmer. Now I'm utterly ashamed of what they're doing. to my beloved country, says Peter, and because of the thousands of illegal men arriving every day. Any future war may well be domestic. And that's certainly a sentiment that a number of people have voiced today within this discussion. We're going to talk to Tobias Elwood in a minute. He's a former chairman of the Defence Select Committee, former Conservative MP, for his perspective on all of this and what should happen. I want yours as well. Use the break, give me a call, 0344 499 1000. I'll have a look at my Twitter as well and see what people have been saying. You can text me as well, 87222, or send me a voice note. Maybe we'll have more of those, but between now and 7, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks to everybody getting in touch on Twitter. Jules says the reason why the EU are scrambling is because there are no leaders in the EU, not one. They're merely an insipid, self-serving cabal of low-calibre technocrats. Jules, tell us what you really think. Appreciate that tweet. One from Billy, he says, your guest, Tan Desai, he is the chairman of the Defence Select Committee. He's yesterday's man, talking about yesterday's issues. 2% and 2.5% of GDP, that's how much money the country earns in terms of giving it to the military. Billy says that's yesterday's targets. Trump wanting everyone to pull their weight in NATO was yesterday's argument. The involvement of Europe in the future of Ukraine is yesterday's proposal. Well, Billy, tell me what you think we should be talking about today. Let's be honest, if the US, says this person, pulls funding from Ukraine, then it's all over unless the EU and UK are willing to fill the funding gap, which they can't. And a decent amount of reaction to what Ed Davey has been saying. I wonder if we can put that up on the screen, actually, for those who are watching. I know a lot of people are listening on the radio. The majority of people are listening on the radio. But for those who are watching on the screen, we can perhaps see this tweet from Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who says, in principle, there should be a vote in Parliament when troops are deployed. I'm confident all sides of the House are likely to agree with the Prime Minister, apart from those Trump bootlickers in reform. That's what Ed Davey has said, and we've had some reaction to that from, quite a lot throughout the programme, but this particular person says, good evening, Peter. In the case of Ed Davey, his statement this afternoon on X, surely he has brought the House into disrepute by insulting fellow MPs and their constituents. Surely Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, has to reprimand him for this breach of House of Commons rules. Well, we will see what the Speaker does. Certainly Ed Davey has not minced his words there. I'm going to put that in just a minute or two, but there are a few other things I want to talk about first. To Tobias Ellwood, he's the former chairman of the Defence Select Committee, former Conservative MP, former Defence Minister, in fact. So Tobias, you're very welcome to the programme this evening. Tell me your thoughts in regard to the Trump deal, what he has proposed, and is Keir Starmer simply playing catch-up here? Because I spoke to Tan Desai a little bit earlier on, one of your successors as the chairman of the Defence Committee, and he said, oh, this has all been planned for a long time, or at least words to that effect. I'm not sure it has.
No, that certainly would not be my take on what we're seeing here. Donald Trump said he was going to invest time here. That's a good thing in a way. He also said he demanded or encouraged Europe to spend more on defense. That's also a good thing. But everybody has been taken by surprise by the fact that he's chosen to speak to Putin directly, to keep Ukraine out of it, to deny even Europe a seat at the table as well, and to pursue some solution which security afterward, but America has nothing to do with it. And by the way, we're also going to dial back from our security interests in Europe. So this is a paradigm shift, I'm afraid, in how America and Europe works together when it comes to European security. So this has caught everybody by surprise. I was at the Munich Security Conference, and after Vance spoke, the vice president, people were scratching their heads to realize that actually there is no interest in the long term about European security, that they are backing away, but in denial, I think, about the consequences of what this will do, because a Europe that is suffering from security will impact on our economy, and longer term that will have a knock-on impact on the American economy as well. So we're not in a good place right now. The world is certainly, and Europe is certainly, much more dangerous than it was last week.
It's interesting talking about J.D. Vance. Do you think he missed an opportunity to perhaps persuade, to bring people along, or at least lay out what America wants to do in regard to Ukraine by talking about other things, talking about free speech and other things which have resonated a lot with our viewers and listeners, but didn't strike me anyway to be entirely germane to the conference?
Not germane at all. They had no place at a security conference when we have so many plates spinning around the world that are about to fall off, so many red lights on the global order dashboard that we require involved.
I'm sorry, we're having another problem with the line there. We'll see if we can maybe get Tobias on the phone and see if we can talk to him there. We've had a few problems, a few technical issues this evening. I do apologise for that, but I definitely want to ask Tobias Ellwood about more about J.D. Vance. I know you've been responding in huge numbers to that as well. Certainly over the weekend programmes that I do, you may know I'm on between 10 and 1 on Saturday and Sunday. But let me know your thoughts on any of this, because we're going to take plenty of calls, texts and tweets between now and 7 o'clock. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. And Tobias, there, we're talking about Europe stepping up on Ukraine. That's something that Keir Starmer certainly says can happen. He says as well, certainly his thoughts in regard to J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance was at the Munich Security Conference. He was talking about free speech. That's something that's, of course, incredibly important to J.D. Vance, incredibly important to this station. We're the home of free speech. We're the home of common sense. But Tobias was saying anyway that his view was that J.D. Vance perhaps shouldn't have used the Munich Security Conference per se to do that. Tobias, I understand, is back with us. And I wonder, Tobias, what you think J.D. Vance perhaps should have said.
Well, thank you. Apologies about the disruption.
Don't worry.
But as I was saying, yes, the Munich Security Conference is the biggest security conference, arguably, in the world. And we want to hear what America is thinking, but also engage with America as to what to do next. And I'm afraid, and I say this as a dual national, I want to see this new administration do well. But the vice president's rant, essentially what it was, of going around the various countries of Europe and telling us what the problems were. He even cited as a version of freedom of speech concerns in the UK, Bournemouth, my old constituency, to do with that abortion clinic where a protester was arrested. But he failed to mention that that individual had been there for over an hour and a half. The police had pleaded with him because there was a dispersion
order there because there have been many, many problems around that clinic, but he refused to go. And, this happened a few years ago. How on earth did that issue end up being shared at the Munich Security Conference? I was completely baffled. And as your question implies, so many other things to talk about, so many other topics to consider.
Well, perhaps I can ask you one topic. Perhaps I can ask you one topic to consider, Tobias. What do you think? The deal could look like? I mean, we've some indicators certainly of what Trump wants, what Putin wants, and actually Europe appears anyway to be being left behind to some degree in the scramble of Macron, of Starmer, of others to have this discussion in Paris today. They seem to be caught on the hoof.
No, the discussions in Paris were about the fact that J.D. Vance's comments at the Munich Security Conference, that Peter Hegseth's comments, the Defense Secretary's comments in Brussels, and what Donald Trump has said shows, as I stressed, that America is actually stepping away from its interests in Europe. A different relationship is now starting, and that's the reality check that we now need to confront. The fact that we are now seen not as a traditional ally and as a friend, as we have done over the last few decades, but as a competitor almost, the one you can strike deals with, but if not walk away from. And that is huge for Britain and Europe when it comes to security. The meeting in Paris was to digest this new paradigm relationship that we're having with America. And the fact that separately another meeting was taking place in Saudi Arabia with representatives from Russia, with everybody else in Europe excluded, shows where things actually are. We're in a very, very dangerous place now. And it's very unfortunate that this has happened with our closest security ally.
Trump has been told by Starmer that Starmer could be a bridge between Trump and the rest of the UK. As one of our viewers pointed out earlier, bridges often get walked all over. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, again, I think we're reading far too much into this as what's going on. There are two challenges right in front of us. Firstly is the details of whatever ceasefire may come about, and then a longer-term deal. And that question mark over who provides that security, given America has made it very, very clear that they would have no truck, nothing to do with the long-term security of Ukraine, even though they are setting the terms of the deal. So they're setting the terms of the deal at the table, and then they're leaving it up to everybody else. That's not how you treat allies. So there's absolutely some bridge building to be done, but there's a wider picture here, geostrategic picture, of us to persuade America that actually it's in their interest for Europe to remain strong. If we're distracted by Russia, if Putin is given space to rearm, regroup, and do this all over again in another part of Europe that will make Europe weaker, it means that we can't support the United States when it wants to then challenge the rise of China. So there's an illogical approach by the American strategy at the moment, and I hope that the back channels will be working overtime to try and fix this, because we are not in a good place.
Just before you go, I just want to ask you, Tobias, about a tweet that's been sent by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, who says, in principle, there should be a vote in Parliament when troops are deployed. Don't think too many people disagree with that. But he says, I'm confident all sides of the House are likely to agree with the Prime Minister, apart from those Trump bootlickers in reform. Should he have used that language?
No, and you know how distracting it is from when we're sending troops anywhere. We should all absolutely think as one. But this, I'm afraid, just puts a lot of people off British politics, is when that language is used. I've got lots of differences of opinion with many parties. I don't feel the need to then start name-calling. It detracts and deters people, good people, from stepping into politics. And if I may, you talked about leadership on the international stage. The gene pool of quality that comes through Britain now, that ends up as being our ministers, our cabinet members, and our prime ministers, are those who stand to be parliamentarians. That's what they are. But who would be a parliamentarian today? Who would dare give up their life, whether it be in academia, industry, economics, or in the armed forces, to step into public life? Ever fewer people will do so. The great and the good step back at the time when we need leadership. And many people are put off by many things. One of them is the name calling that you get, which I'm afraid is you've just illustrated.
And I know you and your family have dealt with much worse than just a bit of name calling, Tobias. Listen, thank you so much for your thoughts this evening. Tobias Elwood there, former MP, former chairman of the Defence Select Committee, indeed former Defence Minister. And Dougie has been in touch and says, good evening, Peter. Regarding Ed Davies' comments on reform, I'd rather lick the boots of Trump than the backside of the EU. An arresting image there, or perhaps an image for which someone should be arrested. I'm joking. That is free speech, and Dougie is more than happy and more than willing and more than free to say what he wants, but I'm not too sure about the mental image there. Tobias has given us his thoughts. What are yours? 0344 499 1000. We'll take some calls between now and 7 o'clock. Kevin O'Sullivan's coming up between 7 and 10. I'm back tomorrow between 4 and 7 here on Talk Drive. But as I say, we'll hear from you in just a minute.
We need to recognize that this is a very serious moment for the security of Europe. The United States is looking like it's stepping back from NATO in its commitment to help support peace in Europe, and that is very serious indeed. I think it represents extraordinary naivety on the part of President Trump, and the rest of his team. And I'd like to remind your readers that I think it's your viewers that I think it is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Time now to find out how you could be in with the chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Thank you to Chris, who says Ed Davey shows how low the Liberal Democrats have become. I'm a voter and Reform Party voter, so I must be a Trump bootlicker also. Better than a guy who hid when people died in the post office scandal. Plus that was hate speech in my eyes. Well, I'm sure Ed Davey would deny that he hid, but certainly he has a case to answer, and many people argue that that hasn't happened. Billy's been back in touch about what the important issues of the day are in regard to defence spending. He says, I meant that aiming for 2 to 2.5% of GDP and rushing to suddenly come up with a European solution is no longer relevant to the United States. We decided not to bother the last time Trump asked us to up our game, and we did not. So now he is taking the lead without us. Mark, also on Twitter, says, I don't know if you realise, but the UK is not in a position of power or influence anymore. Best tell Starmer to stay out of it, because based on everything so far, he is a dangerous liability. The only reason the UK's say meant anything was because we had the USA on our side. And Sue says 12 weeks service might do some good for lots of young men who have no job, no focus, no aspirations. Perhaps it would be a good way of cutting unemployment and giving them a taste of travel many could not afford. Excellent thoughts there from Sue. Let's get some more from Kevin, who's in Liverpool. Kevin, what do you make of all this? You're very welcome to the programme, and thanks for your call.
Hello, good evening. Yeah, I mean, I was listening this morning to Sir Gerald about our sort of our defence spending and where it is spent.
Yes.
Excuse me, sorry. And
is that a dog that wants to be on the radio? Kevin, we'll come back to you in a second, because it sounds as if there is someone canine who perhaps wants to make his or her views thought. We'll come back to Kevin in a second. Mark is in Bolton. Mark, what is your thought on all of this? You're very welcome to the programme.
Good evening, Peter. It's just about this GDP spending on defence.
Yeah.
What I don't get is if the government are saying that they can't afford to up it to at least 3%, 3.5%, whatever.
Yeah.
Why don't we start by stopping sending billions abroad for these these ridiculous things, like, was it the shrimp?
Yeah, there's the front page of the Sun today. As Putin threat grows, the Chancellor dithers over extra money for defence. Yet we blow billions on crazy projects like shrimp farms in Bangladesh. I think there was a rapping lesson for other prisoners somewhere else as well. Yeah, listen, there's 16 billion quid that goes to foreign aid. I'm not saying every single bit of it should stop. But, but some of it should be used here at home. There's no doubt about that, Mark. But then I suppose there are lots of people who would say, what about our schools? What about our hospitals? What about the winter fuel allowance for people as well?
But what about, another thing as well is, what about our security at home?
Yeah.
Not just abroad. We have a problem over here, and I think we know what we're talking about.
We absolutely do, and a lot of people are worried about that. A lot of people don't feel safe in their homes and don't feel that the police will come.
I don't mind admitting it. Yeah, it is worrying, because they're extremists. It's not just like a normal faith where you go to a church or a synagogue.
Well, some Muslims do have a very simple and straightforward faith, but it's those radical Islamists that I'm certainly very worried about, Mark.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Mark, thanks for your thoughts. That's Mark in Bolton there. Let's go to Michael in Northamptonshire. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. What would you like to say?
Well, I was just listening to Tobias Elwood there, and I was astounded, but he and his ilk previously, they've all listened to Trump. I think one of your messages said this as well. When he came out, when he was in the first time around, he made it very clear that, if we didn't step up and start, actually the European nations are more at fault here, and actually started spending to the correct level instead of living it large on the back of the American defense industry and support from the Americans, then they would they would look to pull out.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happening. So, and not only that, you know, you listen to J.D. Vance in his speech, which was tremendous, I have to say, speaking truth to power, and they treat him with disdain. And what do they expect? What on earth do they expect? They are beyond stupid, all right? They are beyond stupid, you know, in terms of their reaction, and they're scuttling around now, having, you know, their conference in Paris, etc. Do they not realise how irrelevant they are, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And they brought that on themselves, and they brought it upon us. That's the point. Yeah.
I think that's a very good point, and I think it's basically impossible to argue with it, Michael, because so much of it is totally true. That's Michael in Northamptonshire. Thank you for that. This debate will continue. It'll continue tomorrow on Drive. I'm here between 4 and 7, and between 7 and 10 this evening. Kevin O'Sullivan, hello, sir.
Hello, Peter. I think it's very bizarre that Keir Starmer, I mean, more and more he seems to live in a world of his own making that none of the rest of us actually inhabit.
Trump doesn't think you're relevant. Move on.
You know, so he's going, oh, I'm the bridge. You know, I'm President Trump's best mate in Europe. I'll be the bridge which will, you know, link us to America. Where does he get that idea from? Did he listen to J.D. Vance's speech on Friday?
I don't think he did.
Starmer,
And one of our viewers said, Kev, I don't know if you heard this tweet being read out, said, thing with bridges, they get walked all over.
Well, yeah, I mean, the point is that speech was directed directly at Keir Starmer and his weak, woke government. Just another bunch of useless Europeans. That's what America was saying. Starmer doesn't seem to think it applies to him. Well, it does. He is no friend of Trump's. He will not be Trump's bridge. The only bridge Trump will want in Britain will be continue to be Nigel Farage. It's as simple as that. Very strange posturing.
And if you want to talk to Europe, if you want to talk to the defence establishment, just go to Mark Rutte, just go to the head of NATO. Why would you bother with Keir Starmer?
Yeah, and why is Starmer going around going, you know, well, everything's cut fine because, you know, I'm very good friends with Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump just said you've got to spend 5% of your GDP on defence. Now, America can talk. America only spends 3.38. So the 5% is probably for the birds. But what do we spend? 2.3% with a promise to go to 2.5. Doesn't look like we're going to keep that promise. Yeah. And Starmer thinks that keeps him on side with Trump. Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't. We are a very low spender on defence, and as long as we continue to be like that, Trump will not want